Hello, and welcome to the Fiddler's Green podcast, where I discuss culture, politics, and the prospects for new human possibility and order in the future. I'm your host, Dave from The Distributist, or as I'm known online, The Distributist, and here we go. I should probably number these episodes, but I haven't started, so I have no idea what number podcast this is. But being that what it may, here we are. So, assuming that my audio is coming in properly, which has persistently been a worry since I've been doing this, I'm going to kind of kick right into my topic of the night. So, over the last few weeks, I really have been preoccupied with one central question, and that is just the looming political reset that we're probably about to experience, or political paradigm shift. Something very deep is on the horizon, and I think it's in the process, or it will imminently completely revamp how we conceptualize politics and how we relate to politics. I think the old political order is dying. It's been a long time coming, but with recent events, you can kind of see it materialize in real time. I think the Ukraine war really kicked this off properly. But the whole process of supply chain collapse and inflation and increasing economic uncertainty really has contributed to this. The Democrat Party, or the Democratic Party in the United States, depending on where you're from, seems to have gotten an increasingly firm grasp on all bureaucratic and administrative areas of government, even while it's sort of on paper approval rating for any of its policies or any of the people that represent it is rock bottom. And I don't think that the concept we've grown up with politics as being this kind of group affiliation, this kind of identity you could get out of a box, this kind of entertainment product almost that we were taught from Jon Stewart is going to survive this. Initially, when I began this show, I was going to start talking about South Park, which was, from my own personal experience as a millennial, I should say, very telling about the evolution of politics or political understanding in the modern world. South Park itself went through these very distinct phases across its existence. And those phases were sort of in the 90s when it first started, and this is going way back. It was really a show that was a farce. It had a very scatologically based humor, and politics intersected it with it a fair amount. There were politicians that appeared, but it was sort of the late night comedy variety. Politicians were very separate from any kind of conversation the show was having with its characters, or that they expected their audience was actually participating in. So it would usually be some politician who would show up and do something silly or disgusting just to make the entire affair of politics look ridiculous to begin with and then leave. Finally, then, in sort of the midpoint of South Park, the point where I really became a fan, the show became distinctly political. And I remember being a fan because it broke rank a little bit with the progressive mores of its time. It wasn't a dyed-in-the-wool outlet for progressive platitudes about identity politics and your standard stuff you might see on any 90s television show that took more of a political angle. This time, South Park was irreverently lampooning the cause of the day. The cause of the day. Someone has a hysteria about some kind of thing that's happening. There's some kind of fad that's going on with a celebrity. There's some kind of worry. I already said hysteria about a given issue. And the point of the show was sort of to debunk it, to kind of show that the issue itself was silly, that this was obscuring the real problems that people had, and the characters had to kind of overcome it. It was a debunking process. And the fact that the South Park creators were themselves libertarians, it really lent itself to this whole kind of, let's take whatever the news is talking about on CNN and we're going to debunk it over, a 25-minute cartoon program with talking fecal matter or whatever. And this was amazing for me at the time because, as a millennial, this kind of represented the transformation I thought was necessary. We were fully involved in politics, but at the same time, the point was to kind of see through it and also to feel kind of like you were engaged in a pursuit of some idealized philosophy or approach to existence. Everything that was being put in front of you was simply a deception mechanism to get to the core of what you wanted, just like you experiencing your life as a consumer, as someone who bought products and wanted things and desired things. And everything else, all the other ideology, was just kind of in between you and the world. And one thing was, again, it was refreshing because South Park had this ability to lampoon progressives along with conservatives. And there was this sense, I suppose, that if you could laugh at something, then that would rob it of its power, right? Obviously, this was what Jon Stewart demonstrated with George W. Bush. That was his whole shtick. Oh, we can laugh at George W. Bush. We can show how ridiculous he is. And, over the course of his 5-year golden era, Jon Stewart and the forces he represented in the millennial generation were able to unseat George Bush. It's not hyperbole to postulate that did actually have a measurable effect. Barack Obama was very much a creature of The Daily Show, and the ascendancy of the supremacy of moderate left-wing politics, that was not a fait accompli in 2005, and by 2010 it most certainly was. And a large reason for that was this attitude that, we're feeding into this intellectual conversation we're having as there's a discourse going on at a higher level. And all we're doing is we're debunking and we're showing up all of the mainstream options to be ridiculous. We don't really have ownership over any ideology. Sure, maybe some of us progressives are in pursuit of the ultimate ideology that's going to unlock all of the doors, but really we're just kind of these disembodied heads that are looking down on all of these charlatans that are proposing ridiculous things, and we just knock them down, and if you can laugh at it, it will go away. And what's so funny is that all the other shows of the 1990s have kind of these distinctive endpoints, these points where they jump the shark. Usually, Jumping the Shark refers to this episode of Happy Days. It's a show from the 70s about the 50s, so it's kind of double dated in that way, where one of the main characters called Fonzie actually jumps over a shark with water skis, and that's the point of the show. And it was this ridiculous premise, and it kind of showed that the show was out of ideas. With South Park, and the analogy on The Simpsons is this infamous episode called The Principal and the Pauper, where they literally undermine the backstory of one of their primary characters in order to get a quick gag. And again, that showed The Simpsons was out of ideas. But for South Park, the thing is that they weren't so much out of ideas as they were just out of time. The episode that kind of killed South Park was the episode that featured a new character called PC Principal, which was actually a brilliant satire on the PC stuff. He's this frat boy that and I think his frat's literally called PC, he's pledged to it, and he goes around bullying people for not being PC enough, right? And it's the juxtaposition is funny, right? Because it's all these super woke ideas coming out of the mouth of the last person you'd expect, this white bro dude who embodies all of the privilege that he's supposed to be calling out. And there's sort of a dimension of satire implicitly in that character because obviously wokies themselves, although they're not white male frat boys, they embody the very privilege that they're constantly trying to call out in their own lives. And there's all that, but that wasn't really the problem. The problem is that for the first time in South Park's sort of second life, it had to acknowledge that this ridiculous force of wokeness wasn't going away. The characters could laugh at this PC Principal guy as much as they wanted to. They could lampoon wokeness as much as they wanted to, but wokeness was immovable. It had happened. It had arrived. Something had finally changed. The show wouldn't reset the same way and start over again from in the classic sitcom sense, right? The classic sitcom formula is that the show always starts over from the beginning. exactly in the same place, so that there's no necessary series or way you can structure the episodes, and it feels like there's a natural pattern in the show, and you can come back for more if you want more. But of course, in 2013, I think when that character premiered, the South Park creators had to admit that something indeed had happened, which was that there had been an ideological shift in America, an ideological shift that would persist no matter how much you made fun of it. And so after that point, the whole political perspective of South Park kind of became ridiculous. It became increasingly, this was right around the point of Gamergate. It kind of became transparent that they were whistling past the graveyard. They were laughing at forces that would ultimately have ownership over them. And you might be laughing today, but you're not going to be laughing tomorrow. And there might be a joke, but the joke isn't on them. The joke's on you. Because at the end of this process, at the end of lampooning this character, he still has you by the balls. And he's going to make you aware of that for the rest of your life. And that made the joke of South Park less funny. I mean, I kind of already was over it, but it indicated something was happening. And in between that period in 2014 and where we are now in 2022, my God, that's 8 years, like a breeze. It seems like this lesson is kind of run its course. The idea that you can kind of react to something or lampoon it or build clout against it is kind of rapidly fading, and the order itself is dying before our eyes. My friend the Franklin had a great video called "The Twilight of the Western World Order" that premiered I think it was a few days ago actually, where he kind of reminded all of us, and it's just the problem is also it's just very apparent where we are, that we're just standing on top of a precipice, and we don't really have any understanding what happens after this point. I don't want to act like I'm foretelling disaster or doom, because we honestly don't know if there is going to be disaster or doom, but we do know that we're sort of in uncharted territories. And it isn't really... the two things that we thought were so important really throughout this period of time, we were trained to think that two things were really important: being able to laugh at our political opponents and being able to show them to be ridiculous, and also being able to kind of come out with supremely cool know-it-all explanations for why you're right and why the other person is wrong, and also to kind of like align yourself to a side that's seen to be winning. This whole quest is kind of finished at this stage. It doesn't matter how much we lampoon the establishment; they're here to stay. They will be probably unseated, but they'll be unseated by events that are so cataclysmic and so large in scope that very little of what we say or do is going to impact that. It's going to impact it a little bit, right? It can hasten some things from happening. It can lessen the blows against our community, but there's not going to be a moment of exposure. Last week, I think I started this conversation the wrong way around, where I answered, "Oh well, if this is the case, what do you do about it?" Right? And I came up with this trifecta of various different objectives: dissent, defect, and dissent, detach, and deatomize are the three things that we need to be always aware of. And these goals are at odds with each other. But really, the bigger frustration I'm having is that it's one thing, the mainstream is going to have to learn this lesson. We can try to communicate with the mainstream. We can kind of try to red pill people, as people used to say. And that's all well and good. There's going to be a lot of hard learning processes. At the end of it, what's going to happen is we're going to emerge as a people that are, by our ordinary understanding of politics, we will be apolitical. We will understand who we are in terms of values and in terms of interests and in terms of friend and enemy. But we won't understand ourselves in terms of ideology or our ability to portray ourselves as advocates of some kind of political movement. Because I think that whole idea is a product of this politics as an entertainment product. that's rapidly disintegrating before our eyes. So I should say, the frustration is, obviously the rest of America, the rest of the West is going to come to these revelations when they do. But what's kind of frustrated me, and I guess I don't want to give another lecture about how the dissident right is screwing up, is just how all of our approaches to this have been really kind of bad. I feel that in many ways, people online who call themselves right-wingers and who should kind of know better just refuse to learn some of these lessons. Last week, I put a particular emphasis. It just, when you're walking through treacherous times, what you're trying to do is you're trying to find allies, find friends, find information and secure wisdom. You're not trying to pose or come up with some kind of social media clout that's caused by someone else being shown to be stupid or wrong, because someone else being exposed doesn't really do you any good. Case in point, I mentioned the whole case of that trans teacher in Ontario. This is a person who came to school with these egregiously oversized synthetic breasts. This is obviously, if it's not a joke or a hoax, it's transparently a fetish. This person's transparently trying to break the rules, not out of any kind of gender dysphoria or comfort, but just to break the rules and flaunt them. Maybe as part of hoax, maybe for sexual pleasure, who knows, but it's transparent what's going on. But the exposure of that doesn't do anything. It doesn't advance the conversation. Just this week, Academic Agent has been obsessed with this pop star called Lizzo. Academic Agent's a great guy, good friend, was wonderful content. But I mean, like, the question is, and an enormous amount of digital ink's been spilled over tracing the origins of Lizzo. And Lizzo is this, I don't know, overweight. I think she might even be technically obese, because this woman is incredibly overweight, and I'm overweight. And that's not exactly capture. She's much, much heavier than is healthy, obviously, and certainly much healthier than we usually see in pop stars. And this, and she's sort of rocketed to the top of U.S. consciousness and pop charts. And she's made famous by twerking. And as you might imagine, this person is sort of every kind of ridiculous thing that we come to expect out of clown world, sort of like the big-breasted teacher who's obviously either trying to exploit or troll the school system that they're working for. But an enormous amount of ink has been spilled over, how do we trace the origins of Lizzo? Is this an American phenomenon? Is this an African phenomenon? Is this a product of Christianity? And I mean, I understand that this represents everything you don't like, but how much is this a mature conversation? How much of this is just sort of part of an outrage machine that doesn't actually advance anything? I don't see what I get from understanding the degeneracy of Lizzo or how that moves the conversation forward at all. The point of having conversations at this point, and I mentioned this a little bit on the last stream, the point of having conversations at this point are to sort of sharpen the distinctions between to sharpen the distinctions politically in the choices that we have to make, either to support the regime or to stand against it, and to also sharpen the distinctions between the vision that most right-wingers have and the left wing. This is a game that right-wingers play, not for clout, but for truth. And for this reason, whenever you're not pushing in a direction that leads directly to a revelation about truth, and not just any truth, but a deeper truth, you're really not pushing in the right direction. And any time that you're not trying to elucidate clearly what each side believes at their steelman, you're kind of impeding the conversation. And this is another thing. What do we call this movement of dissident people who are also on the right wing? apparently not dissident right? That's a no-no, right? We can't use that word anymore. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The people on the right have this dual problem. First of all, they want to get as many people aware of the fact that the regime as it stands, the apparatus, the way of doing things that we've come to know as liberal democratic government is fundamentally poisoned at its core at this stage, and what's needed is a hard rejection of it. The second understanding we need to give to people is that the fundamental vision of our opponents on the left is sort of diseased and untrue. I suppose, focusing on things like Lizzo and the transgender teacher is kind of opening up a portal into why progressivism is wrong or something. But the conversation is proceeding in all the wrong ways. The conversation is proceeding as a contest among right-wingers. It's like a game of old maid, but you're trying to pin, as opposed to making the other person take the old maid. You're supposed to get the other side of the conversation to take blame for this degenerate pop star and put it on them that way. This is not something that actually, and of course, because it's so accusatory, because this is in the mode of trying to find guilt and trying to establish who are the good people and who are the bad people, who are the smart people that are the debunkers, and who are the rubes that are sitting there with an archaic ideology who can't really explain what they believe, and who are destined to kind of be torn down for the new good thing. So it really is like it's the embodiment of the Jon Stewart perspective on politics played out now in microcosm on the right wing. Everything is fundamentally wrong about this conversation. There's no reason to have a conversation about who's responsible for Lizzo among a community that is entirely in agreement that the phenomenon of these sort of massively hypersexualized, morbidly obese, twerking pop stars is bad news. There's no way that this generates clarity in any way. It doesn't generate clarity as to what the morals of your opponent are or what their methods are. It doesn't generate clarity of ways that the left is weak, and it doesn't actually communicate with anybody who might be sucked in by this phenomenon. It's pure backbiting. The way we need to approach intellectual issues, well, first of all, let me take a step back. The first thing we need to realize is that conflict in sort of a conflict in the sense that we experience it on social media, the contest of clout, the debunking, the public shaming, the cancellations, these are all products of politics and mass movements, for sure. That is absolutely the case, and there's no way to completely avoid these modes. But these modes absolutely do not help right-wingers, as people like Nick Land have pointed out, and Curtis Yarvin, and basically everyone, Spandrel. We could just throw everyone in on the online right. We've all pointed out that these dialectic forms that we associate with democratic dialectic norms, they necessarily favor the left wing. And moreover, the more confused the dialogue gets, the more it relies on framing, and the more complicated things get, the easier it is, the more effective it is to advance left-wing causes. So there's an easy analogy to this in government. So people who are fans of R.N. McIntyre, and I certainly am, I think he got this from Sam Francis, who probably in turn was getting it from Burnham's The Managerial State, which is a book that I've never read, but Burnham's great, right? R.N. McIntyre is fond of pointing out that so much of what we consider the cathedral's operating capacity relies on manipulating procedural outcomes. So the more complicated government gets, the harder it is to trace causality from cause to effect, the harder it is to measure feedback loops from bad policy to bad outcome. The more this helps the established oligarchy, and also, in a different capacity, the more it helps the activist left. The more the question of good governments becomes not about wise and prudent decision making, the more it comes about which side are the good guys and which side are the bad guys, the more it is amenable to mass democratic politics that really embodies left zone degeneration. and that drives this phenomenon where we increasingly have harsher and harsher political battles, while the health of our society, of our bodies, and our spirituality just crumble away into dust. These tools, again, they're not completely avoidable, but they're distinctly the tools of the enemy. Unclarity in language, complication in language, the more layers of theory you have on the bare bones of reality, the more avenues there are for misunderstanding. And in misunderstanding, that opens the door to recriminations and to politics of the variety that I think are highly destructive and that are sort of a hallmark of democratic and progressive politics. And the same thing is true for the left as it is for the right. It doesn't help us to engage in this in our own spheres. Recently this week, there was a release of Innuendo Studios. So Innuendo Studios is a classic, I guess, bread tuber. He was around before the leftists started calling themselves BreadTube. And his channel had kind of two lives. The first one was as an Anita Sarkeesian apologist channel. So he was one of the original anti-Gamergate people. I think Sargon did a review of one or two of his videos way back in like the ancient times. And then post-2016, he emerged with this very popular series called the Alt-Right Playbook, in which he categorizes the alt-right's super secret strategies to be evil and manipulative. And I did a review of several of these Innuendo Studios videos. They're incredibly bad videos because they're just an extended series of bad faith arguments. They don't really have they're an extended examination of what right wingers believe, but sort of following in the tradition of Theodore Adorno with the F scale. And the recent people who try to categorize fascism, right? And they categorize it in these vague ways that make it seem like all conservatives are fascist to the extent that they have non-progressive opinions. And of course, progressives are the exact opposite. Innuendo Studios' only MO is to completely muddy the waters on what conservatives actually believe. You could take every one of Innuendo Studios' videos and just boil it down into a few sentences. He takes hours to write these things out and to go through all of the archetypes of the right-wingers, completely misstating their opinions at every stage of the process. But like the whole thing is, if you were just to boil down it to its bare intellectual points, the whole thing is it almost comes to nothing. The message of every Innuendo Studios video is that right-wingers are completely malfeasant people who have evil souls, and what we know as right-wing ideology or ideological disagreements that are non-progressive or that have ideological positions that are not progressive or that are traditionalist are simply elaborate ruses. They're elaborate conspiracies to sort of hack the sympathy of progressives, to kind of portray them as having these genuine positions that they really don't, and they're all bad faith sociopaths that are just trying to manipulate you. And so what progressives need to do are properly recognize all right-wingers as soulless, evil people, disregard them, and then develop procedural workarounds that will allow them to get to 51% of the vote and completely lock them out of any kind of dialogue. I took probably a few paragraphs to say that, but that's the point of every Innuendo Studio video. The point is, don't talk to the right wing. I can save you a lot of time watching the videos there, but the problem is that Innuendo Studios can't be that blunt. At all times when you watch Innuendo Studios' videos, there's an open question about what this author actually believes. What are his values? What are his religion? What are his desires for the future? Who does he think we should vote for? All of those things never really materialize. It's this constant redescription of the right wing as bad faith, evil, nefarious actors rubbing their palms together as they cause the decline of the progressive worldview. This guy's career could be over if he could be blunt. If he could just say what I just said, that's the entire point of his videos, is just to convince everyone that right-wingers don't believe what they say are evil manipulators. But he can't, because saying that is, it kind of reveals a little bit too much. And this is where a lot of left-wingers are right now is that they can't speak in plain language, because speaking in plain language is it has kind of weird implications. So much of contemporary left-wing thought is just shut up and believe the experts, or you're a traitor. That's the motivating. If you were to I'm not even saying walking through the implications. Just walk through what emotion they're feeling. They're feeling betrayed because they feel that we have some fundamental duty to these experts, and that these experts are the only guide to reality. And then by following the experts, you can be one of the good people. But saying that kind of reveals too much. It reveals a dimension of the political battle that points to something that's sort of scary for them outside of reality, or outside of their perception of reality. And so what benefits them is sort of these elaborate conversations about what procedural misstep Donald Trump took, or how right-wingers are wrong about one given issue or another given issue. Ultimately, it boils down to the fact that the left wing absolutely approves of the decision-making apparatus that nominates experts, and the right wing disapproves of it. But what we have to pretend like this conversation is actually a complicated discussion of facts, and not simply a conversation about where our core loyalties lie. And the same thing's true with Greta Thunberg. Greta Thunberg's not here to have a conversation about the climate about the nature of climate change, or the exact effects of the carbon cycle, or the climate sensitivity to carbon dioxide, or what a prudent energy policy is for Europe, or how many deaths are we going to accept due to starvation and due to exposure and potential energy grid failure. And deaths are always involved in energy grid failures, and it appears that Europe, if not the United States, is facing that down in the next 6 months. That's not the conversation. There's no such conversation is actually occurring. Well, the conversation that's occurring is, how do we find and punish the heretics against the holy scientific consensus, which has been granted unto us by the government that has been declared to be democratic in its properties, right? It doesn't matter if it was elected like the Biden administration, or whether it was unelected like the EU. These bodies have the democratic label on them, and they have the science label on them, even if they didn't do controlled experiments. And so whatever they say, whatever their opinion is, therefore has this holy quality, and those that deviate from it are heretics. I guess I've kind of gone on a little bit too long about the left, as is my tendency, my defect. But this is something that the right wing can learn from its mistakes with the left. The point of talking to the left, if we were still talking to the left, which most of us are not, is to kind of cut through the innuendo and to let everything kind of exist in the most basic possible form. Just repeat back what they're telling you in very basic terms, and say, okay, so what you're telling me, if anyone in the studios was in the studio with me right now, it says like, so your point really is that, right-wingers are horrible sociopaths that don't have different values than you, but that secretly know your values are correct and are just trying to procure misery in the human race through manipulating your empathy. That's, I'd let him respond to that, but that's what he's saying. What benefits right-wingers, and what benefits all of us who are sort of moving from this politics' showmanship into this mode of politics of reality, is just to deal with things in the most straightforward way, to kind of let the linguistic simplicity drop away, the linguistic complexity drop away, and the simplicity be laid bare. Wittgenstein, who is this famous early 20th century philosopher, and he was a contemporary of Bertrand Russell and Kurt Gödel, he had this very famous statement where he said that there are no philosophical disagreements, there are just linguistic disagreements. And he said there are moral disagreements and there are linguistic disagreements, but there are evidence collecting disagreements, like how do you properly collect evidence and rank it. But there are no philosophical disagreements. All philosophical disagreements are linguistic disagreements. And, I think that's an extreme, and this sort of built into his philosophy that all mathematics is when we construct our own vision of the world, it's constructed in language. And the implications of that language out towards the world, the consequences they have, that's what we call logic or philosophy. And when there's a difference, when two people have similar values and they're coming from similar places and they have a philosophical disagreement, what it really means is that they haven't communicated properly. They're not actually talking about the right thing. And the logic they're doing is simply to translate one person's worldview into a way that interfaces with the other. So at the end of the day, both people can properly state their disagreement in terms that they both agree to. So, for instance, with Protestants and Catholics, our language is all very similar, so we can quite clearly state our disagreements. One person believes in sola scriptura, one does not. One believes in salvation by faith alone, one believes in salvation by faith and works. These are the disagreements. You can enumerate them. They could be questions of scriptural evidence. They could be potentially, although probably unlikely in the case of Christianity, differences in moral axioms, differences in values. But beyond those two other options, the only other option is linguistics. And so the thing is that so much of the problem we're dealing with, getting past this idiotic, endless conversation, this endless counter-signaling, has to do with cutting through this layer of innuendo, these veiled threats and veiled positions that constantly obscure what we're really doing. I'm not going to go through a few of them, and I don't know how to make this not personal. Maybe this will be the spicier thing. The names of the people I've had these conversations with will be removed for purposes of protecting the identity of the people involved. But it wouldn't even matter, because although everything I'm going to talk about right now is they're based on actual conversations I've had with people. I've had these problems many times before with many different people, and these people I'm talking to I respect as friends. But there are certain just plain linguistic mistakes that I think we need to stop making. These are not fruitful ways of approaching problems. These are not fruitful ways of coming to truth, of kind of cutting through the Gordian knot and laying bare where the real disagreements in fact and the real disagreements in moral axiom are. I'll start with the first one, and again, this is sort of with more of a red pill or manosphere community. And I had a member of this community on a few weeks ago to discuss this problem, and this is the issue that I mentioned many times before, which is called the issue I call is the view from nowhere. So the view, and I think a lot of people understand in the abstract what this is that a person with a view from nowhere is a person who is like the disembodied head in Jon Stewart's Audience, or the observer, the political observer that's implicitly there in any South Park episode from 2002 to 2013, over that 10-year period. This person really doesn't have any opinions. What he's doing is he's taking in the ridiculousness of the world, and he's just kind of like rejecting it or embracing it. And his opinion is that of sort of, a consumer, like, send this dish back to me, waiter, and give me a new one. Now, I'm here to demand solutions, not to provide them. That's the famous joke about Greta Thunberg, where I don't know if she's actually said this, right? But there's this meme where she says, well, my job is to demand solutions, not to provide them. We need to rid our minds of this demand solutions but not provide them. This is a useless way to approach issues. A lot of people understand this in the abstract, but they'll take positions like something. They'll take entirely negative positions, such as the modern relationship market is screwed. It's terrible. It totally screws over men. The marriage market, the alimony court system, the divorce court system screws over men. dating apps are horribly skewed, and they completely play into female hypergamy, and at the same time, the number of eligible females is at an all-time low due to the fact that very few of them want to get married, and they have all sorts of health problems, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And all those things might be true, right? But this isn't like a coherent worldview. This is a complaint. and to bring it up against a coherent worldview, the complaint can make any number of complaints against other worldviews, and they don't have to be coherent. They can complain about Christianity, and simultaneously they can complain about Christianity being too monogamous, like they don't allow men the sex that they need, but they also complain about it not being monogamous enough. It would be like if we put two people in a conversation together, and one person was saying was complaining about how there's too many fat people, and then the other person was providing a solution that we should try to radically reduce the amount of sugar in people's diets. Well, the thing is that the person who complains about fat people, he can say anything to the other guy. Like, he doesn't have to take a position. He can claim that, well, cutting sugar is too radical, no one's going to do it. He can say that, oh, well, it doesn't go far enough. These anti-sugar advocates, they want to cut a little bit of people's sugar, but you have to cut all of it. They can sort of digress the conversation and say, well, sugar is just one of a variety of things that cause this problem. And some of these things might be true, but there's no coherency here. There's an infinite number of slings that the negative position can hurl against the positive one. He can move the goalposts back and back and back. He can even do ridiculous things like blame the person advocating for a solution that not enough people have listened to him. Like, the problem with your position is that nobody's following it. It's like the Idi Amin answer. The problem with your answer is that your answer is not compelling. It hasn't recommended itself to me. This is absolutely bonkers, and it's but this is what sort of a negative position gets you. Oops. This is sort of what a negative position gets you. I could go through this again. It's amazing. We all kind of know that this view from nowhere generates nothing. It generates no clarity. But we still kind of entertain it. And I think this is sort of what modern social media has trained us to do. I'm not interested in entertain. And the issue also is that, on Twitter, people with purely negative positions that have no prescriptive dimension to them, they can just hurl insults at the people who are actually advocating for something positive, and do so incredibly aggressively. And there can be no debate, because any debate is just a constant regression of the goalposts back to the point where you literally have to explain why your idea isn't compelling. Like, it hasn't Idi Amin style recommended itself to your brain, as if ideas were people. I don't really see why anybody should engage with this ever. I mean, I'm just going to stop replying to this stuff, and I don't know. I guess the issue is that really, if our discussions can't improve on this front, there's just going to have to be no more dialogue, with various people, because this does less than nothing. It takes people who are trying to focus on solutions and then kind of regresses them into an ultimate conversation about who's to blame. The same thing to a lesser extent is true with the whole pagan versus Christian dialogue. And I know I've mentioned this last 3 live streams. The issue is, I don't think that there's clarity in linguistics when it comes to the discussion about paganism versus Christianity. The two sides are speaking different languages. And unfortunately, again, I think the real blameworthy party is certainly more the pagan side on this, although, I want to say that I sympathize in certain regards. But laid bare conversation about religion is a conversation over the question of, what do you worship? Right? Like, there's no way to get around that. And so I assume that because people are pursuing paganism, they understand that there is a need to worship something, right? That all humans will have something that they worship and hold as primary. Now, if you're more philosophically inclined and you take this a step further, or I hope pagans are taking this a step further in their thought process. They'll also come to the conclusion that really when we say that we worship something, what we mean is it's of primary importance. It means that no matter what happens, this will always be the primary thing. It's the value that trumps all values. It's sort of the root user operating command of your entire moral system. Nothing can be above this. I think most people who philosophically pursue religion understand that they're looking for an ultimate fixed lodestone, something that cannot possibly be wrong, but something that cannot fail, but something that can only be failed in the abstract. The difficulty is that the conversation we have with pagans rarely respects this, I should say, and what I've had in a lot of my conversations is, first, they're not clear on what they worship. They're not clear on what their ultimate good is. It's not clear that they believe in like an actual god, Wotan, who is just that he's the source of all values and he can't do anything wrong because he is goodness itself and he has other qualities or something like that. Like, it's not clear that they believe in something like that. So their understanding of worship is completely different, and I think fundamentally incorrect. And so it has all of these, a lot of the conversations I've gotten into with people who are pagan or pagan sympathetic, there are these sort of weird trolley problems. So in the Bible, just in Genesis, I should say, right? There's this really beautiful, this is the ultimate like Reddit, like this is the ultimate thing that triggers the Reddit people. They'll always go to this particular chapter. This is their favorite one in the world because it just makes the soy jacks like you wouldn't believe it. But there's this passage where Abraham sacrifices Isaac. He's commanded by God to sacrifice his only son, which he has another son by, Hagar, and that's a whole other story. But his only legitimate son, the continuation of his tribe, is being sacrificed for God. And it's important that the sacrifice, if you talk to most biblical scholars, there's two important things to understand from the story. First, that the request was made. Second, that the request, or I should say three things, so I say two. First, that the request was made by God that the most valuable thing in the world, the future of the tribe and his most beloved family member, that sacrifice was asked for by God. The second thing you're supposed to understand about the story is that the sacrifice, that upon hearing this command in earnest, that sacrifice was carried out. Like, there was actually an attempt to carry out the sacrifice by Abraham. And the third important thing is that the sacrifice was not carried out because it was the point of the sacrifice was not to make the sacrifice, but to demonstrate the sacrifice, to demonstrate the order of priority. God did not want Isaac to die, but it was important to understand the first and the second. God is always the primary, and the continuation of family, race, nation, and your own life is always secondary. And this is what the story in Genesis really forces us to contend with. The second you say that is not true, you worship whatever was not sacrificed rather than worshiping God. So if you say that, I would not sacrifice my family for God, then you worship the family. I would not sacrifice my race for God, you worship your race or your people or whatever like that. Now again, if you take this a step further philosophically, you'll understand that the worshiping things like family and race actually is degenerate because it's implicitly saying that there's no way your family can ever do wrong. There's no moral standard that actually, you can never say, my family is evil, and I need to fight against them because your family is God. If they do bad, then bad is good, right? They're the ultimate locus and lodestone of reality. And if you worship race, you can't actually say that your race is degenerated. People don't realize that that's a caveat. Like, in order to even be able to see degeneration in your own race, you have to not worship your own race because there has to be some metric from which your race deviates. And this is something that it's a problem, and it creates these conversations between pagans and Christians where they constantly try to trap Christians in trolley problems. They constantly try to trap Christians in trolley problems, where they're like, oh well, would you sacrifice your nation for the Catholic Church? Like, if you were in a battle between the Catholic Church and America, would you betray America for the Catholic Church? Would you betray your family for God, and all these things? Like, and what they're trying to get at, they're trying to kind of evoke the lesson being taught in the tale of Abraham sacrificing Isaac, that indeed, yes, my highest value is God, and there can't be no value beyond that. That's a truth. But these artificially constructed trolley problems, they sort of obscure the whole nature of being human. Like, Jews worship God and not the Jewish people. But, I mean, you're not reading history correctly if you don't see how they defend their people. They defend their people. And in fact, the only way they can defend their people is through not worshiping them. This idea, the same thing is true, like, okay, well, if you admit that you put God before your family, that means you don't love your family. That means if you put your family, if you put God before your family, you just hate your family. There's this apocryphal, there's this point where that question is put to Jesus, and he says, you have to put God before your family, you have to put me before your family. And I don't think this is in the gospel, but apocryphal sources say that everyone was just upset at this, other than Judas, who didn't love his family. And the point is that these trade-offs are supposed to be hard, and they're supposed to be things that you struggle with. They're supposed to be things that ordinary people have to balance. And they're not ways that, like, and no good faith people, other than like traders, try to manipulate you into saying that because there's a higher principle you follow, you don't love your son or your wife or your people, or you can't fight for your nation. And contrived trolley problems where you have, like, it would be like saying, like, would you murder your son to save the entire human race? And it's like ridiculous. Like, first of all, my son's part of the human race, so I don't even understand what that would mean. And so, but the whole point is to get you to say something ridiculous, so the implication can be you're a horrible person because you betrayed, this thing that we all agree is good, because you have a higher principle. This is just, like, I don't think this, first of all, I mean, when this argument form is put across, it's just a failure of linguistics. I think if pagans examined their own principles and their own religion sincerely, and they held it to the same standards, they would realize that they were in the exact same position as Christians are. We all have higher order values, and our alignment to things in this world are, in some sense, conditional. Now, there's almost no circumstances, almost none, other than a literal, like, God appears before me, where you'd ever sacrifice a primary loyalty to God. It's really only true in the abstract. And as the story of Isaac and Abraham demonstrates, God comes close to almost saying that it will never be directly asked for in that way. And so these sort of quandaries are just kind of logistic traps. Now, hold on a minute. Like, this is, before I kind of get on my high horse and say that this is all bad faith, it's not bad faith, right? It's not bad faith when pagans make these sort of trolley problem attacks. And the reason why it's not bad faith is that there is a legitimate, like, I know enough about them, and I've been listening to these people enough, and I respect them enough to understand what it is they're really afraid of. And what they're really afraid of is the Charles I thing, that they're afraid that we're going to be at war. And then, like Charles I, the Pope's going to come and he's going to dangle his chain, and then the next thing you know, all the Catholics are going to facilitate a foreign invasion of the homeland, to the ultimate detriment and betrayal of their own people, because the guy who's making the God talk said the right magical words, and unlocked our root command and got us to procured, basically tricked us into committing a supreme act of treachery in the name of a greater abstract righteousness. I'm gonna get a drink of water here, pardon me. I mean, is that concern ridiculous? Is that concern, it's not ridiculous. That literally, I mean, I don't know if Charles I was actually guilty of doing that, but that's what he was executed for by Oliver Cromwell after the English Civil War. And I don't know if, but it's certainly the case. Like, people have been convinced by clergy to be traitors. People have been convinced by clergy to betray their own families. In many ways, the people who were responsible for the Catholic sex abuse crisis hid behind God and the propriety of the church to commit the most horrific acts. And the same thing is true. I'm sure there are some crazy people, I know there have been crazy people that have tried to sacrifice their children because some demon told them that they needed to, because God commanded. But all of this is just to obscure the problem involved. No proper reading of Christian morality tells you that you're supposed to lay down, actually betray your family or your country or your people to absolute wickedness because somebody speaking in the name of God is telling you to do wickedness. That is absolutely against the principle involved. And okay, can people be tricked? Sure. But that's a more complicated conversation. That's not now we're in the realm of what prudent government and prudent conduct is, and where the lines between various different loyalties lie. And this is an actual conversation, and one that has to be held among people who have both of those values. Like, if I were to, I would gladly have a conversation about where my loyalties between God and country and family lie, and where the divisions and fault lines are, and what I would accept as proper exception in each case. But I'd only have that conversation if I wasn't going to have it with someone who's arguing from a view from nowhere. I would argue that with a Christian always, and with a pagan insofar as I knew that he was struggling with the same problem. Pagans and atheists can't not struggle with this problem. This is a universal problem. They may use different language to describe this problem, but them being atheists or pagans does not get them around this issue. But yet we have to pretend like this isn't an issue so that we can make these little aggressive attacks on Twitter or Telegram and all this stuff. And it just tires me. It ties up the entire discourse in this meaningless drivel. It doesn't go anywhere. I've really gone on a tirade here, but I'm building towards something. I'm building towards something. The point of this is just to say that we need to start communicating like adults in plain language. We need to say what we mean and mean what we say, and have ownership and constancy. Constancy is something that I think this was actually considered a value back in the day. When people said, like, be constant, there is this, I have this great book of American folk hymns called Sacred Heart. And one of them says, like, always remember, pilgrim, be constant in time. And you go, what, constant? That sounds like, it's an advertisement for some suppository or something like that, or some laxative, right? Solve your constancy issue with, Laxapro or whatever. But I mean, no. What this is this comes from sort of classic Christian wisdom, where the mature soul, the demonically possessed soul, is in constant chaos. He says one thing one day and says another thing the other day, and he doesn't care if one critique contradicts the other, as long as it's a critique that puts him on top, right? So it's just this storm of various different rejections and anger. It literally is the view from nowhere. Whereas the mature soul, the soul of the saint, and this is not sufficient to be a saint by any means, but this is one of the markers of it, and something we should strive for, is that this soul has this constant mode to it. This is the personality of this person. This is how they approach problems. All my cards are on the table. I'm not trying to pull a fast one over on you. This is my spirit and my position and my morals are fixed and they're available for everyone to see. And if you have a problem with that, let that stand openly in time. And all the time online, there's this rejection of constancy. And constancy means in many ways to accept one's own flaws, because once you stay still and speak slow, as you can say right now, I speak slow, you can notice that I have a speech impediment, which everyone always points out, like they discovered, like the 10th planet in the solar system or whatever. And, you notice the flaws in things when you slow down. But part of constancy is to kind of be all right with that. It's more important for you to be able to see me as I am than it is for me to put on some facade that I am the supreme being who has all the right answers and no one ever can catch me and I go here and there and I have no flaws and blah, 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 right? This brings me to another sort of frustration that was circulating around like the internet, this whole constant shift around the label dissident right. This week in particular, a lot of really good guys were just counter-signaling this label hard. I kind of get it. As movements grow, they get a lot of spurgy people attached to them, and things get embarrassing. Obviously, early on in my channel, I did a lot of counter-signaling against the alt-right, which is sort of the original iteration of the dissident right. But several things. First of all, in its original conception, alt-right and dissident right meant the same thing. All they meant were the sum total of people or thinkers or intellectuals or participants in a dialogue that were not mainstream, that rejected liberalism and the Enlightenment, and who wanted radical reform of our liberal democratic system in a direction that was not progressive or left-wing. That's all it meant. It was very close to a purely negative position. Now, obviously, almost everyone on the distant right, or whatever you want to call this, has certain positive positions, and we could talk about that in turn. But it was very close to a negative position. The counter-signaling against the alt-right in the 2017 was necessary because that word had literally become the brand of a particular bad actor, Richard Spencer. And it was sort of the brand of his particular form of cringe, like white nationalism mixed with Rachel Maddow globalism philosophy that, we now all kind of universally see as pretty much a lolcow. But in that point, that word meant something positive. And, when you said, I don't like the alt-right, you're basically saying, I don't like Richard Spencer. The problem is that the dissident right, the word dissident right, it's still a purely negative term. It's still a term that describes just what I said, the non-mainstream people who want radical change, not in the left-wing direction. And it describes like a real group of people that's obvious. You can see this on interview shows like Alex Kashuda, or you can see this in the ideas discussed on podcasts like the Claremont Institute, or just watching Academic Agent's channel, or seeing Who Follows Who, or reading R.N. McIntyre's feed. There are a lot of people in this sphere called the dissident right. They all have very similar ideas. They all talk to each other. It's a thing. Are there a bunch of cringe people in it? Of course there are, and there always will be. And if you decide to relabel it, and you decide to relabel it from the distant right to the deep right, or the new right, or the double plus ultra good right, or to the don't label me beyond labels, YOLO, whatever movement, it will still have cringe people in it the second it grows. It will still have incoherency and problems and knife fights within it. But as we do this whole game where we adopt a label, everyone calls themselves this label, and then 6 months later, we denounce it. We say, oh, everyone who uses this label is stupid. Or, we need to save people from this movement called insert label I used for myself 6 months ago. And so fun because the juxtaposition, I mean, this is not a good look, guys. I don't know why people are trying to do this constantly. I'm not saying you have to use dissident right for yourself. You can say, I don't like the word, just don't call me it. That's fine, but saying that like everyone who uses this are sort of lunatics or cringe, or we need to save people, like adopting the language of the therapeutic managerial state, we need to save young men from the distant right. I mean, you got videos where you're calling your friends that label that you can click on live, and meanwhile, people are going to conferences like the NatCon, the National Conservative Conference that Alex Kashida came back from. They're going to these conferences and they're coming back, and people, there's a number of words people describe for the circle. Dissident right, certainly one of them. And so people hear this term dissident right, they're interested, they want to see more people like Alex Kashida. They log on to your Telegram or Twitter feed as one of the luminaries of this new right movement, and then the first thing they see is you dumping on everybody. Or I mean, you know that you're not dumping on the cool people, but that's not perceived, right? That's all that what they see is this completely schizo environment where everyone has one label one month and then denounces everyone who has the same label the next month, like we're the creatures from Dr. Seuss's Sneetches on the Beach. This is a fashion cycle. This is not how people communicate ideas. Use a label or don't, but this counter signaling is just, it's useless and it's immature. And again, it's like this attempt to get back to the disembodied head state. It's an attempt to get back to like, oh, the positive position, but whenever I'm in a debate, I'm a view from nowhere floating head. More and more as we reach this event horizon that is the next 6 months, where I think most of our political sensibilities are going to get pushed straight into the grinder, we're going to undergo a transformation where the most important thing is being able to communicate clearly with other people in very plain language about the things you value the most. Identities should not be counter-signaling. They should not be trying to obtain clout. And they should certainly not be disembodied or views from nowhere. They should be constant. They should be calm. They should be slow to express. And insofar as we embrace identities that are based on politics, they should be aspirational identities. We should be able to ask ourselves the following questions. Like whenever I say like, when I approach pagans, or when I approach people who are third positionists, or when I approach people who are integralists or whatever, right? Italian elite theorists, I should be able to ask the same sort of questions. And this should be the same set of questions I should be able to ask my friends in real life. That is, what do you want? Like, what genuinely do you want for the future? What do you value? The next question should be, okay, so what are you building? What are your projects that you're actually trying to undertake? How are you trying to provide solutions and not just demand them? And then, two other things that I think are really important that I think Alex Kashida has been she's importantly highlighted in her last few essays. What are your constraints? What are your morals? What are the things you won't do? Like I said before, with the boundaries in between, your loyalty to God and your loyalty to country or politics or people. Everyone has moral constraints that are ultimate and binding. And what are your constraints and their conditions? What makes you a figure that is not chaotic and blows in the wind due to power? What makes you somebody that actually has an identity beyond what is granted to him by the powers that be, and that is actually principled? What do you stop yourself from eating? What do you stop yourself from enjoying? Where do you limit your own ambitions and appetites? And then finally, how are you putting all of these desires into your actual life? What life are you creating for yourself that reflects these things and shows you to be a person that actually is living their politics? Because politics, I really believe it, after this year, the politics that we preach is going to matter less and less, and the politics that we live is going to matter more and more. Because the politics we preach is going to become transparently fake as politics rises on our doorstep. To bring up Settler's Lament, I think for the second time in this show, he retweeted what perhaps is my favorite meme of 2022. And this is the last thing I'm going to say in the monologue. So, of all the memes that came out of 2022, I think this is new. And it happened because of an organic thing that started happening in Reddit. So Reddit, as everyone knows, is the original sort of question board, what do you call it, forum. It's basically like web forums 2.0. And it used to be cool, and then sometime around 2015, with the social justice takeover, it became really cringe, and it became the home of sort of the progressive new male soy boy personality, right? But periodically on Reddit, because it has its roots in image board culture, people will post pictures or videos from the world before, right? The world before hard modernity, before liquid modernity, pictures of happy families, pictures of orderly cities with low crime, architecture that looks glorious, music that sounds good and inspiring, masculinity that's ambitious and that's heroic, and femininity that is cherished and divine and nurturing. And everyone will be like, man, I wish I could go back to that. That looks so good. I wonder why our future can't look more like that. And then there's this response that all of the progressives say. They say, it was never like that. There was never a world like this that existed. There was never people. This is just a myth. This is propaganda. You're falling for the propaganda of the old world. This is like looking at Hitler Youth posters or propaganda from the Soviet Union. And, these families that are happy weren't actually happy. These cities that are orderly weren't orderly. It's just in your imagination, it's propaganda. And that's the code. And this evolved into the meme that coming in 2022 that reposted off of this, where it's this soy boy going, nobody ever had a family that was intact. Nobody ever loved each other. No one had a constant society. There were no societies that ever had traditionalist values. No one was ever happy. And you're a bigot if they think they were. And because it's transparently false. I mean, they want it to seem like it could be. They want it to seem like it's all propaganda. And once we're far enough away from it, it does. But we all have grandparents. Were your grandparents, was your grandmother some miserable wilting flower who was abused by her husband? Or was she a proud matriarch? I think in most people's experiences, their grandmother, even though they were incredibly traditional, were more of the proud matriarch that lived in a society that was very much like you see in these pictures. They weren't the abused second sex chained to a radiator while she cooked her husband's meals with a black eye that you get from some kind of Andrea Dworkin fever dream. This is a real world. And the modern world wants to forget it as soon as possible, because the sooner they make you believe that the most authentic human existence is the bug man, they kind of win in a fundamental way. They kind of win because your aspirations are limited to the horizons of the pod. And this is why. I mean, it sounds sort of like a Jordan Peterson clean your room thing, but it really isn't. This is the politics of survival. And the politics of survival are telling stories about a better world that existed and that could exist. And part of the way those stories gain their fire is that you actually profess principles earnestly, slowly, and with constancy that embody that previous world, and that also you live it out in your world. You see a hint of it in the outline of people who live more like this, live more like the ideal than you do. And that's there's a power there that cracks the progressive worldview down the center, and it's a power that's only obscured by this constant obsession with one-upsmanship and brinksmanship and abstract critique that does not have any groundedness that we've all been trained to do from Twitter. And I hope we can make the transition. But with that, that's my dialogue. That's my monologue for tonight, and on to super chats, as they say. So I probably should. Well, it's late enough here, so I'll just continue to go on my way. That was about an hour. Usually, I thought that what this podcast would be like roughly an hour, a little bit more, a little bit less of monologue, and then an hour of super chats. But it turns out that the super chats usually take a lot longer. So I never know if I should be reading these things faster or slower. But we'll see. I don't know. I've always wanted this to be 2 hours and not 3, but it rarely turns out that way. Okay, that's not good. All right. I'm having a hard time pinning these things, which is not good. I'll just read them out, I guess. That's odd. This was actually on the questions tab of Entropy, but now it's disappeared. And so for some reason, because I can't unclick it on the questions tab, does that not work? Okay, that was bad. I completely lost it. I'm going to try to go back and get that one. I think that one was... okay, I can remember it. This is it. Let's see if it highlights now. Every time I have to have if I don't have a technical difficulty, would you even know this is a Shibudist stream? Okay, great, perfect. Morgan Allen for $5 USA. Any thoughts on Peter Zeihan? He was someone dissidents might be able to learn something from, including trade, demography, geopolitics, deglobalization, state collapse, though he tends to be a bit flippant about all of it and be a milquetoast neocon. So Peter Zeihan, I think I've seen one talk by his, and I was talking to somebody about him the other day. He's somebody, I believe, who's, this is a variation on One Punch Man. He's a one metric man. His big thing is demographics or destiny, if memory serves me correctly. And usually I'm really, really down on one metric men, except in this case, Peter Zeihan has happened upon my own favorite indicator of civilization health, which is birth rate. I think obviously determining the health of a people in civilization is complicated and impossible to measure. And if I had my druthers, I'd measure it through spirituality, but I can't measure spirituality. So birth rate's my favorite proxy, which is known to correlate highly with religious practice. And so Peter Zeihan has the same metric that I do, that he values, which is birth rate. And so he has this whole deal about how China is going to go down because it's essentially going to get old before it gets rich. And I agree, he's kind of a neocon, but I hate to say this, Morgan, I haven't really read deeply of him. And he does, like I said, he does kind of have the kind of neolibs tone to him, like the Tyler Cohen thing. Tyler Cohen, I mean, he was on Richard Hanania the other day, and he's this libertarian economist, a very famous one, like very knowledgeable about the ins and outs of economics, and a person I thought was a heavy hitter in the rationalist sphere, and for a while I'm like, oh man, he's a heavyweight, and so I was shocked a few years ago when I saw him sort of pen a defense of wokeness as being sort of like a market solution to all these problems. And I was like, I read the essay. It was pretty weak, I thought. And I'm like, okay, but, maybe he didn't write a good essay. But Tyler Cohen, he has, I think I'm thinking of the right guy. Let me check this out, actually. I hope I'm getting his name right here. Tyler Cohen. It's Cohen. No, I think I said Cohen. It's Cohen, but probably it's the same root, right? But like Tyler Cohen, he has an enormous brain, and if he's pro wokeness, there must be some kind of super special high IQ reason that wokeness might be right, that he's just like not ready to drop he goes on Richard Tanania's podcast, and again, it's like Andrew Sullivan. He just or Sam Harris too. He just delivers all of these boomer takes about how not being woke is mean, and he has relatives that like gay marriage, so that means wokeness is good, and on balance it's good because you have to prove that wokeness is bad, and it doesn't matter if wokeness is collapsing our competence hierarchies or completely closing intellectual discourse in universities and constraining scientific findings and putting forward absolute scientific bunk. Before we were woke, we were a little bit meme. It's like the ultimate boomer take. And so like you hear these things and you immediately kind of like, you're like, oh man, did I misjudge you, or are you that cringe in real life? I don't know. But anyway, thanks for the super chat. On the Wivs for $10, Dave, I met an amazing girl on a dating app. The best woman I've met so far, Catholic and wants kids, but she's been vaxxed. I think it might have negative health consequences and possible effects on fertility. Any thoughts on it? Any thoughts or advice? Yeah, I think that okay, first of all, I'm not saying that concerns about the vax and fertility are wrong. But, I mean, first of all, if being vax meant you were just infertile, there may be negative consequences of this treatment, but that couldn't possibly be, that would have shown up on her numbers by then. That would have been impossible to obscure. So the idea that she has had this treatment, therefore she is infertile, therefore she, you should exclude her as a prospect is kind of ridiculous. I really discourage, I don't know, man. I mean, look, I know people want to have families, and fertility windows is always something that you need to take into account as a man. That's a reality. Always discuss whether you want to have kids with a woman as early as possible. That should be, if she doesn't want kids, I think that's just a big red flag. You're probably not on the right page, right? All that song and dance. But I really discourage this whole idea of trying to biometrically determine the percentage chance that she could be infertile. I mean, who knows? Does green eyes give her a higher chance of being infertile? How about her BMI? Have you looked through all of her medical history? Are you sure? This is kind of an insane way to approach dating. This is sort of you're almost kind of mirroring the female hypergamy back in on itself. And you have to have a guy who's 6'8" and a PhD and earns $200,000 a year minimum, or you're not even interested. All of these things have to be aligned with this. You're not taking the right. I mean, I want to respect the concern while saying that this whole perspective is just not a fundamentally right way to approach relationships. I can assure you your wife will be infertile at some stage, guaranteed. Menopause is a reality, and the chance that she's going to die before that is minuscule. So, you will be married to a person who's infertile at some stage, and that window is a roll of the dice. And it's just fundamentally unmanly to not accept that risk. Furthermore, if you're entertaining this woman for marriage, you're giving yourself as much as she's giving hers. And to sort of address the question of her viability in such stark terms smacks of a consumer product and a consumer relationship, which is the exact opposite attitude that you should take. I'm not going to dismiss concerns about the COVID treatment. I'm not going to dismiss concerns about fertility in terms of life goal. But this sort of instrumental approach, I just think is the wrong way to approach it. And I don't think that the risk is that high. But what do I know? I mean, you're not looking for an expert opinion on biostatistics. Even if I do have some expertise in statistics, I haven't looked at the numbers, right? But I discourage you from sort of putting the quest for a mate in those terms is just indicative of an attitude that doesn't strike me as very successful for marriage in the long term. And that strikes me as a bigger problem. That will probably be a bigger barrier to your developing a good family life than like minuscule chances of hard infertility, coming from young women who are, otherwise, from your description, pretty much perfect. Okay, Ben Theman for $10. Good evening, Dave. I recently finished writing my first novel, a work of fantasy. It's about changing the heart of a tyrant and establishing spiritual and temporal peace in the midst of chaos. If I emailed it to you, would you be able to give it some feedback, time permitting? No worries if you can't. Yeah, I would actually kind of be more up for reading a novel, but I'm not going to be able to edit your novel for you. Like, when I said I'd read people's novels, I kind of was intending to read a finished product more than a manuscript. Yeah, like, sure, I'll give it a shot. I'll probably read a little bit of it. My time is really crunched. But I'm not going to write criticisms of it in anything more than just like broad strokes. The broadest strokes imaginable. Like, I just don't have more. I have all these people who are waiting for me to email them back, and I don't have time to write essays. I have a lot of essays that I haven't written already. So, but thank you for the offer. And if you email it to me, I'll read at least a little bit of it and tell you what I think of like the first few chapters, I guess. All right. I don't know if that's good enough for you, so feel free to take me up on that or not. Synthesize or no? Synthesize and Sir Neil? Oh, God. These people with unpronounceable names. For $10. I hear legacy media /Dems/libs repeating the line, Trump refused to commit to peaceful transfer of power. They're talking about this point endlessly. Strangely, I've never heard anyone debunk this. To me, to ask Trump, will you commit is like asking someone, when did you stop beating your wife? Thoughts? Well, I mean, my thoughts are, this is sort of like, I mean, who's going to debunk this? I'm pretty sure Tucker Carlson has debunked this. That I mean, there was a peaceful transfer of power, and Trump didn't raise a militia. That did occur. He did tell his followers to go home, very famously, at the actual vote to approve the election results. So there was a peaceful transfer of power, January 6th notwithstanding. And I'm sure Fox News has debunked this. I'm sure the Federalist has debunked this. I'm sure the Claremont Institute and the American Mind have debunked this. But, what's the audience? People can always manipulate language to make it seem like this wasn't the case, or there was some exception or something, so on and so forth. So the problem, as always, is what is our audience? This is why debunking the left has, I mean, like, for instance, like, we can all debunk transgenderism. Like, anybody can. The thing is, like, it has a one question debunk that very famously put forward by Matt Walsh, is that they can't answer one simple question without referring to a literal tautology, like a tautology like a tautological nonsense. But does that matter? Does that stop the apparatus of the progressive movements? No, because we're not in any way in meaningful dialogue with these people. We're not platformed by them, and none of our points really make it to them in their original form. So this is just, it's kind of an immaterial question, I guess. And I don't know. I mean, Trump certainly won't admit to, I mean, Trump won't speak. The thing is, like, Trump won't give them the exact quote they want. And this is both his strength and his weakness. So they can do the Don Lemon thing, whereas Trump is correct in saying that if you start repeating yes or no, and you don't reframe the question, they can lead you around by the nose by structuring the language of all their questions in a way that makes it seem like you're saying certain things but not others, or implying that you'll go along with one thing and not the other thing, right? And so what Trump's great strength is not playing into the linguistic framework of their questions and to sort of translate them into language that he preferred. But this also allowed them to say things like, well, since he didn't give the denouncement in this language, that must mean that it's not a denouncement. And that explanation flies for most progressives, for most moderate centrists. I mean, even Adam and Sitch were buying that line in 2021. I don't know if they're still buying it. Adam and Sitch are like my test case scenario for brain dead centrists. So, everyone's like, "Oh my God, he mentioned Adam and Sitch. You must be obsessed with them." No, I'm just using them as an example of brain dead centrists. But my point is that explanation of a refusal to play into manipulative linguistics is sold by the cathedral as denialism or dishonesty, when it's really the exact opposite of that. And and right now at least, progressives and centrists are buying it. Maybe they won't after this winter. When things happen, like people tell you a recession isn't a recession, or inflation isn't inflation, or that negative side effects aren't negative side effects. If people tell them that an energy crisis isn't an energy crisis, or that a food shortage isn't a food shortage, then maybe this lesson will start sinking in finally. But, the human mind being what it is, we can only kind of wait in an anticipation of that moment. Odd Harvey for $5 USA. I've been trying to get in touch with my Southern cultural heritage, and I've been wondering, what is culture? How would you define culture? What does it consist of? Random, I recently learned Flannery O'Connor is from my hometown of Savannah, Georgia. Yeah, I visited her house when I was in Savannah, Georgia for a business trip. It was kind of nice. Although her manor, the place she's famous living in, is quite a bit. I think it's still in Georgia, but it's like in the hinterland somewhere. She had a peacock farm where she wrote most of her novels. I mean, culture is one of these words that doesn't really mean anything specifically. It's too broad of a term for me to give you a definitive accounting of what culture is. I think it's better for what you're talking about. What you're really talking about is heritage. Heritage is a dimension of culture that consists of the things that we hand down from generation to generation, and that we think are important to hand down from generation to generation, and that we value as a collective that's spaced out, not spatially, but temporally. Spaced out. That's separated, not spatially, but temporally. And I feel that the South has kind of been very conscious of a specific heritage, and that's where I would start. Look at the things that your grandmother gave to you and start there. Then look at the things. I mean, then as you kind of graduate from that, look at things and practices that the higher order people of the previous age would have thought, this really defines me. This is something of excellence that comes from my area, my town, my state, my world. What would, if you went back in time to Savannah, Georgia of 1920, what would a Georgian of 1920 say is Georgian culture? Or if you went back to 1880 or 1840. And, with Savannah, Georgia, of all places, it's very easy to do that because it's one of the few southern towns that wasn't just completely burnt to a crisp at the end of the Civil War. So it has a lot of the architecture intact. And it still feels like an old southerny town. That's very nice, I guess. It was spared by Sherman as he marched to the sea. And I don't know. I mean, if I were Southern, obviously the thing that stands out is sort of old-timey music. The stuff from Nashville's good and fine, but there's a deeper heritage that comes from hymns. There's also sort of a folk tale tradition that comes from the South as well. And, I'm not a Southerner, so I can't really help you out too much. Obviously, there's the tradition of Southern Gothic, which is brought forward by people like William Faulkner and Flannery O'Connor, and books like, most recently, books like The Garden of Midnight in the Garden of Earth, of Good and Evil, which is, talk about your Southern Gothic novel that takes place in Savannah, Georgia. It has that famous statue of the bird girl with the two. It's always so anticlimactic because that famous statue of the bird girl with the two cups, you immediately think of you immediately think of sort of Eve in the garden of earthly delights and the decision of good and evil, and her head tilted towards the left side, indicating no, she's considering more for evil than she is for good, indicating original sin. But then you learn that the artist was just depicting a girl that was feeding birds, and it has nothing to do with like this allegorical contest of good and evil, even though it looks just like that. But I don't know. I would start with literature and just ask yourself the question: if the past gave us their best, what would they give us? And start there. That's my best suggestion here. Solus Gifus, Solus Gryphus for $100 USA. Wow. Well, thank you very much. He just writes, "Thank you for your wisdom." Well, thank you very much. That's incredibly generous. I really appreciate it. It helps me deal with inflation, and I really appreciate it. Ivan Jaredon Sivo but there's no question there, so I'm going to move on. If you want to ask me a question later, you can. I'll give you a little more time. Ian Jaredon Sivo for $3 USA. Thank you for your thought-provoking streams. You always have a calming influence. Oops, I forgot to select this. You always have a calming influence. You always have a calming influence on the chaos. Have you ever heard from Anglo Ortho? All his videos have been taken down. Yeah, that's a good. I just saw that Anglo Ortho has left YouTube. He might have gotten scared. It's tough out there. It's scary. It is really scary. And I don't blame him for kind of removing his presence from the online space. He was an incredibly wise person, and I really want to learn from him. And so it would really dishearten me to think that something bad happened to him, or that he was scared away from speaking publicly in a capacity that he felt would be useful to people. In the time he talked to me, he really emphasized the necessity to get back to the fundamental things that I tried to touch on in this conversation tonight. And to kind of, make yourself somebody who's more grounded and more constant, and who lives for sort of the deeper things. But that also necessarily means that your career as a content creator is going to have to take a back seat to genuine threats to your family. And in the environment that we live in right now, man, any of us could be threatened with serious setbacks given how exposed we are. But thank you very much, Ian, and I'll go on to the next one. Yeah, I'll try to follow up on that, but I don't know what happened. And yeah. So Prudentialist answers. He said he had to disappear for a while. His wife is still active on Lambda's Discord server. I really want to have Lambda on a stream, and I want to invite him on with my priest friend to talk about spirituality. And I just want to have a stream dedicated to that one day. And I really want to make this happen. It's just that with the real world going on and with life as it is, I just haven't had the time to plan that I really want to. Nerve AMV Maker for $10 USA. The arguments of Protestants versus Catholics and the United States versus Europe are centuries old and have no bearing on our current crisis. The dissident right using the universal problem of modernity to score petty political points in these historical conflicts and bragging about which side is less screwed is unbearably cringe. I thought that it couldn't get worse than paganism versus Christians, which I admittedly participated in. But then this week we went on to arguing over who's more responsible for screwing us over, the United States or Europe, this is just the craziest. What are you trying to prove here? I mean, your allies are dispersed across both continents. The opponent we're fighting against is transnational, and their elites are freely exchanged in NGOs that span from London to Paris, to Budapest, to New York, to Los Angeles. and we're sitting here like playing varsity football, bragging over who has the best home team, and this is just absolutely ridiculous. I don't. The problem is that it's so easy to disrespect people. Like I don't want to disrespect pagans, but I just don't want to have this stream of disrespect against Christianity kind of coming at me, and then because I feel if I ignore it, then I'm fundamentally showing weakness, and there just has to be an understanding of what's sort of an above the belt attack and what's a below the belt attack. I think that for Protestants and Catholics, it should be pretty clear that the only arguments that should be entertained in this debate are arguments over theology. The contest is theological. And to integrate sort of political dimensions into this conflict is, I mean, I guess they're always in the background, but to integrate political dimensions explicitly into this conflict between Protestants and Catholics degrades the conversation and actually breaks down any kind of political coalition you could possibly hope for. But anyway, yeah, thank you very much, Nirvan V Maker. I'm going to go on here. Dreadnought for $10 USA. I think the only real question left to be asked, Dave, is have you signed up for your local Vault Tech Vault yet? Now before our elites get us all nuked by China, or excuse me, Russia. East Asia or Eurasia, which is it going to be? More seriously, I wouldn't worry much about Academic Agent. He's always getting obsessed about something, it seems like. Yeah, I just hope that it's not going to cause like drama disruptions across the community. I mean, these kind of drama explosions, they do shake people out of the community. Like people have real fights over this stuff. And like Academic Agent's a great guy. It's just these conversations we get into. They're really tiresome, and they're not representative of the world that we're moving into. I mean, at least not the world that I see us moving into. And the world that I see us moving into is getting very, very real, very, very quickly. And I appreciate taking this time to talk to the internet, and I appreciate the life of the mind, and I think that we are developing, we're really the generation that's developing a new understanding of itself. We're discovering all of these core human truths, and we're discovering these things about like how constraint is the most important part of your character. Not freedom, constraint. Constraint is really what defines your character in the classic sense. When people said that, remember that comic strip Calvin and Hobbes? And there's a dad in it, and he always said, Calvin, you should do X, you should do Y, because it builds character, and X and Y are always do something that Calvin doesn't want to do. It builds character, or having this bad habit shows weakness of character. That's a common phrase from the old world, and it was because the old world understood that constraint was what built character. Like that's an actual learning, an actual piece of wisdom that has come out of the distant right that people can incorporate in their own lives. The most important thing that we're developing in this sphere is a kind of attitude we can take to personal interactions, a kind of way of confronting raw modernity when it comes at you. And a lot of these interactions I don't really know how to deal with. When someone comes at you with pronouns, like the appropriate thing is to kind of smile and nod like Jackie Chan from Rush Hour, pretend like you don't speak English because it's so ridiculous. Maybe that's how I've interacted with it for the most part. Is there some other way that you can sort of talk about your power level or reveal it in ways that are non-disruptive and that are kind of dog whistles? It's hard to say. That's sort of an open point of discussion. Guys, I have to refill my water because these are going on a little bit longer than I thought. I'm going to mute the stream and I'll be back in 30 seconds. All right, guys, thanks for bearing with me. Um, Hopefully, we didn't lose too many of you there. Or, I mean, it's answering super chat time, so I probably lost a few people. But let's get back to it. All right, next one. Yeah, I mean, AA is a good guy. You know, he's kind of a grumpy old man before his time. I don't think that this is the problem. Is that the point isn't to be a grumpy old man. The point is to kind of it's to kind of occupy your own body and your own place with a certain amount of ownership. It's kind of the point is to kind of see the things you value and see the things that really don't matter and put them in the proper context, and to kind of, because we all know that we are probably entering into a period of, if not harder constraint, right? But none of us have been trained to exist in a world of hard constraint. And so we fundamentally lost contact with the things that are true and solid and the things that are ephemeral and consumer-oriented and narcissistic. And being a grumpy old man is a kind of way to sidestep the problem, is to kind of reject everything because everything is stupid. This is sort of the ultimate academic way of approaching the problem, of just, deconstructing everything, and it's all inadequate to the purpose of the ideal. But I'm not directly quoting BAP here, but the kind of more important thing that you look at, you find looking at older examples of how people used to behave, is just to kind of occupy a real space and own it, and occupy a real human life and own that. And that's ultimately the point. I was thinking of naming the stream, and one of the things I wanted to discuss is people who pursue a virtue and focus in their lives. They're genuinely more interesting people than the flash and the pan celebrities that are constantly hanging on controversy. And I really wish that young men could cultivate this more. There's this famous passage that G.K. Chesterton had written about celibacy, and he said that I could summarize the church's position on celibacy being this: that white is a color and not simply the absence of color. And this is very much the Christian perspective. Celibacy is not just the absence of sex. It is a certain state of holiness, and it has a value all of its own. And not having sex in your life is kind of a blessing in some sense, right? It allows you to focus on other things. It allows you to focus on higher things. It's not like it is something you give up in some circumstances, but it's more of an artistic choice for negative space than it is for some kind of depriving of purpose. And I said this as a married man who's, my life is sort of dominated by sex and its consequences, or a woman and her consequences, right? And so I'm kind of speaking in hindsight here, but sort of one of the fundamentally poisonous aspects of our own society is this image of the incel. And it's amazing how much Christian men have internalized this process. And this is why I always cringe so much about thirst posting. I mean, incel, first of all, the incel thing already, the fact that it's involuntary, I mean, that already contextualizes it in this condition that was shared by history's greatest men of not being attached to sex. It's something that's forced upon you, and it's like a punishment, rather than just an aspect of your life that's neutral and that you occupy, and that you may change or you may not. It has no bearing on your character, does it, right? But as in the incel framework, this is the fundamental moral judgment on your life is that you can't get sex. And what's so funny is that some Christian men, like they do this thing where it's like they're not married yet, they're celibate, maybe they don't know if they're ever going to get married, but like they start orbiting around women, or like these thirst posts, or this image of this ideal trad wife or whatever. And I'm not even going to get into anime, but it's the same deal, right? And that's just like the worst thing you can do, right? I mean, obviously, A, doesn't help you get an actual woman, right? So just instructively, practically is not a good step to take to actually end your celibacy, is to kind of orbit around women. But the same thing, the problem is like it fundamentally inverts what should be an actual opportunity in your life. If you do get married, say when you're 30 as a guy, like you're going to have the majority of your life orbiting around a woman's desires. You really want the brief period before that to be orbiting around a fictional woman's desires, right? I mean, take your opportunity when you can. And if you're one of those people who will never get married, whose vocation is either through some religious vocation, like some sworn celibacy, or some sort of implicit celibacy, like sex is just not for me, and I'm going to go my own way. And when I say men going their own way, I actually mean going your own way, not perpetually complaining about women. Like the whole point of going your own way is to go your own way. You're liberated from the constraint of ever having to need sex. So why not reach for the goods that are... Is sex the ultimate good? Is there no good higher? Is there no good that's higher than sex? And if there is a good higher than sex, then why aren't celibates... Why isn't that their identity? Right? Why are they in cells and not whatever their higher good is other than sex? Sorry, that was a digression, not even a super chat. But I had to get off my chest. Okay, but thank you. We Will Survive for $10 USA. It seems to me that the right wing has a problem talking about things that are not the left. The new Amazon nightmare being an example. We need to talk about something that's not what the left... we need to talk about something that's not what the left has caused or created. I would talk right-wing fan fiction over another iteration of the left is still bad. Yeah, but the problem is We Will Survive is that right-wing fan, like, for instance, like I had a person give me their book manuscript just now, and this isn't the first time I've read things like that. If I did a show, I did a show talking, like cursory talking about woke culture, like Amazon's Rings of Power. But if I spent like an episode of this podcast talking about that book, no one would follow me because no one would have read it. And so I don't know. I'll spend an episode talking about the Passage Prize, certainly, when I get my hands on that for a reasonable price. But right now, it's still really early days. And the communities, what we really should be developing is sort of aesthetic sub-communities, people who are committed to certain projects and certain pursuits. For myself, certainly, that's the revival of Western Christianity and Western family life, and the art that will facilitate those to actually find new life and find new meaning. For other people, it might be entirely different endeavors, right? But without the organization to kind of consume those things at a mass scale, make them sort of big splashes, then they become sort of very difficult to talk about as topics themselves. Maybe I can try to find... I mean, people give me some suggestions. So like, I could do a stream on Murdoch, right? I could talk about Murdoch, and I think indeed my friend Clossington did do a stream on Murdoch, like a retrospective on that phenomenon, which is like, it's an interesting phenomenon. And I certainly don't agree with Murdoch's politics, but like as a cultural artifact, it was kind of amazing because nothing like it had ever really existed this side of like 1950. And so it was like amazing to see something like this emerge on the screen. Again, The difficulty is that while Murdoch might have had an impact on the right wing spaces, it doesn't really have any relevance to the larger culture, and a largemouth audience isn't going to be able to necessarily tap into that. So I imagine as things kind of carry forward, as the right produces more stuff, there will be opportunities that emerge. People give the Daily Wire a bad time, but them making movies that are separate from Hollywood is a great start to things, because it creates an ecosystem that's fundamentally separated and divided out of Hollywood itself. And it's a way that people can start building connections, and they can build connections, and they can build fan communities that don't follow the ordinary woke rules. And that I can't tell you how valuable that is. That's something that we really, we should see that as an opportunity, and it's a stepping stone. Fanfics, I've never been a real fan of fanfics. It's more a quality thing than a derivative thing. Like, I know all works are derivative of all other works. Shakespeare copied half his stories from pre-existing ones. Everyone knows that. But the fanfic culture is kind of always been a poisonous one, and therefore not super compelling. But okay, Dreadnought for $10. I get what you're saying about not just complaining, but it is actually possible that there is no solutions for some problems. Maybe the dating market is irrevocably screwed. To use your example, to use a medical example, sometimes a patient is just going to die. Sometimes there is no solution. Well, I mean, then the conversation is what happens after the patient dies. Is your argument, Dreadnought, that the entirety of our civilization is just doomed, including our individual families? I don't get the sense that that's the case. I get the sense that we are going to survive in diaspora. That's my instinct. That we're going to survive at a much lower level of existence than we've been used to before. In which case, I hate to constantly be quoting G.K. Chesterton, but in the same book, Orthodoxy, he gives this analogy of Robinson Crusoe, and he said that the most romantic thing in the story of Robinson Crusoe, which is, again, it's a story about a guy who was marooned on a desert island in, I think, the early 18th century. I could be getting it wrong about what. It's a really. I forget who wrote that book, but is it Defoe? I forget. But he's stranded on a desert island, and Chesterton says the most romantic element of that book is the list of things that he's able to rescue from the ship as it sinks around him. And the thing is that every single thing on that list that was saved is imbued with absolute importance because of its absolute scarcity. And it's amazing that he could rescue a musket off the ship or a bottle of rum. And you're thinking to yourself, well, what could you use that for? How could that be the difference between life and death? And that's really the position we're on here. The reality of the ship sinking is not really the question we're entertaining. The question we're entertaining is, what do we grab as the ship sinks that we are trying to fit onto the lifeboat or the raft to get to the desert island? And that's what I mean by a solution. Talking about the physics of the ship sinking, that's a little bit useful, right? The physics of politics is always useful because it gives you some indication of what might happen. But the future is not always very predictable. And the real important thing is what are our efforts best focused on saving and building. Narco-Republican for US $3. White Pill. Recently I've been investigating dissident movements in Brazil. I was warmly surprised as I kept coming across recommendations to your classic video, A Gentle Introduction to Moldbug. Well, that's pretty funny. Yeah, I saw you retweet that. That's interesting. Well, I mean, I always thought that Brazil would be a hotbed of reaction if it could kind of develop autonomy among the regions, because a lot of the people in Brazil are immigrants from Europe, and oftentimes many of those immigrants were, how do I put this lightly, the losers in certain recent European wars. in which case their allegiance to elements of the cathedral is a little bit tenuous. And once the cathedral crumbles, they might be willing to strike out in new directions that we haven't seen for a while. And there's a lot of opportunities there, a lot of exciting opportunities. Another thing I should mention, because you were mentioning a gentle introduction to Molebug, I think I made that video, and I actually didn't take that long recording it. This is back in the day when, for like a few months, or for 3 months, the channel was my full-time job in 2018 and 2019, and so like I was able to do all this elaborate stuff. I recorded the video so fast that in the places where I talk about Curtis Yarvin, I literally mispronounce his name. I dropped the R, and it's super embarrassing, but it turned out to be very popular. Right now, everyone's really down on our friend Uncle Yarv because of his recent kind of disastrous, personal dramas that have kind of seized the headlines on the right wing. But really, guys, it's none of our business. I mean, like, if you were Catholic, it would be a scandal for me, but he's not. So all I care about is the quality of his work. And we'll critique certain essays about dark elves and hobbits, but beyond that, our task is to support our friend and hope that he sees the light and stays far, far away from millennial women. I always get the sense that, Gen Xers who are recently been widowed, they are made into widowers. They say to themselves, well, time to get back into the dating pool. And when they left the dating pool, it was 5 inches deep. And now they step back into the millennial dating pool, and the thing just goes down for 100 meters, and they sink straight to the bottom, in this abrupt drop, because the ground have shifted so far in the 30-something years since they were on the market, that they have no idea of the kind of insanity that they can expect from women who form their identity from online spaces. Dreadnought for $10. Religious loyalty. I believe in the Catholic Church, and I'm an RCIA teacher, but I understand concerns people have, not just because of potential political treachery, but because of current teachings and leadership. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops is explicitly pro-migration, for example. It is a messy situation, in my opinion. This is a huge problem. This is a huge problem, and I don't know how to deal with it because the Catholic Church blows in the direction of the powers that be, because the bishops are giving in to the powers that be. They'll relent if there's a counter push away from the center of where they want to be. But they're incredibly, but they'll always go with the flow. And so like I said, like the whole idea that Catholics could make mistakes or be tempted into treachery by allusions to somebody telling them from a religious perspective, that is a very real possibility. That's a reality of human existence. But it's a reality of human existence that everyone has to deal with, because unless you're a sociopath or an ethno-narcissist, there always is a higher good that needs to be balanced. The thing is that I believe in the case of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, I don't believe that they're actually speaking from principle or from proper competence in matters political. I feel like they're speaking from political pressure coming from the United States government and coming from the people, coming from sort of the elite circles they frequent. And because of that, I think this is a serious problem. I don't know what the solution is. It's certainly not to engage in, it's certainly not to engage in direct politics inside the church. That actually, that's the classic example of mud wrestling a pig. They want you to politicize the church. And what we need to do is we need to have the church be exclusively a place of receiving the sacraments. Now, I think that you could use this as an organizing center for other interested parties to come together and actually put pressure back on priests and maybe even bishops in a much more positive direction, in a reforming direction. But that needs to kind of go on with, potentially with friends of the church, but not inside the church properly, and not in the context where you could humiliate priests or lay people, senior lay people in public. That's a very bad precedent to establish. All right, I'm going to go on, but thank you very much, Dreadnought. Ian Garrison Sivo, $5 USA. The scapegoating of America for the problems of modernity is intellectually lazy. The idea that Europeans can take credit for all of the successes of modernity, but none of its failures, belies a lack of humility which got us here in the first place. I mean, I guess. I don't think these recrimination attacks really serve anyone's interests. For instance, a lot of people in the original NRX sphere, that when they come to it the first time, they'll say one of two things. They're like, well, we shouldn't use the cathedral as a word because it's disrespectful to Catholicism. Cathedral is a Christian word, and we're using it for a system of intellectual consensus that is fundamentally anti-Christian, or has become anti-Christian. And the other thing they say is it's unfair to lay the blame of progressivism on the shoulders of Protestantism. Both of these statements completely misunderstand the point of these concepts to begin with. The point of saying that the cathedral is Protestant in origin is not to blame Protestants that practice Protestantism. It's to understand its evolutionary properties so you can better understand how this thing works in the present. That's the point of it. And so, this is, but it gets tied up in sort of these egos having to do with various different groups. And so we are here where we are, where we're blaming entire continent systems for the causes of our woes. What is the point of that? May I ask? What is the point of blaming America for the decline of Europe? That's I don't know what good ideas are even supposed to come out of that conversation. You're taking, the specific organizations that led to the decline of Europe. They're like the State Department, the university system that spans both Europe and America, the development of secularized Christianity starting in Massachusetts and then starting in Massachusetts and in Britain and then spreading out across the rest of the continent, and the development of world trade organizations and mass media organizations and monopolies. Those are the direct culprits. All of those guys have got offices and they have offices that span the continents, and they had offices that spanned the continents even in the 1950s. So we're doing this sort of we're doing this sort of recrimination archaeology. It's pretty ridiculous, and I don't exactly know what we're trying to learn here. Someone says, long-time listener, So Will Acolyte for $5 says, long-time listener, first-time super chatter, how do you find meaning in work or create it? I work in software, like you, though much earlier in my career. It feels hollow, yet leaving tech seems like a good way to be broke and have no good impact. I think that there's several ways to do it. The first way is to just take pride in your work and take pride in helping coworkers, and that often helps. Learn the technologies well so that you can feel like you can own them. Oftentimes, it helps to have a side software project that you work on by yourself. So, there are a variety of software projects that I know the people at the Sildings organization are working on, and I think they have repos in GitLab. Starting one there or making your own or helping out Urbit, it lets you see that on this job, you're developing yourself as a person and not simply for the greater glory of the corporation or to earn the rapidly inflating American dollar, but actually to develop skills in yourself that can be cross-applied to things that actually make the world a better place. So that's one thing. The second thing, and this sounds like kind of a cop-out, beyond just taking pride in work and finding the areas of the work that you like and making sure that you convinced yourself that this is enriching you. The other thing is to sort of take a philosophy of self-sacrifice to your work. Obviously, my work isn't really my passion. This is my passion. Writing is my passion. Understanding the world and spirituality is my passion, not crunching numbers. But approach it with sort of this attitude of self-sacrifice, and that it's your role to till the earth from which you've come, and this should be offered up with a certain amount of gratefulness. You are helping other people get work done. You are engaged in noble pursuits of excellence. To what end? Temporally, I can't tell you whether it's good or bad, but ultimately, it doesn't really matter. It's like the soldier, right? All soldiers who die in battle are heroes. It doesn't matter what side they fought for. I'm a huge enemy of the Red Army, but I would never dream of tearing down a monument to the Red Army, or to Zhukov, or to any of the generals who fought in the Red Army. That would be insane. These people put their lives on the line for what they believed in, and in some sense, so are workers, to a slightly lesser extent, but still. There's this demoralizing post that came out on Twitter a few months ago that said, "Don't forget, whatever you do for work, you're slowly training yourself to become that thing." So if you work in IT, you're training yourself to slowly become, a cog in an IT machine, to become like a computer program, so you better be okay with becoming that cog in a wheel if you work in that job. I disagree entirely. I mean, first of all, if you don't like computer programming, you might be able to find another career for yourself. I'm assuming you're not going to move careers, but if you decide to stay in computer programming, don't think about it like yourself being turned into a computer. This is just a trade you're doing. This is just you working the earth. My great grandfather was a farmer. Was he training himself to become a combine harvester? My grandfather was a machinist. Was he training himself to become an auto lathe? My father was a mathematician. Was he training himself to become a calculator? These things, like, we all have work that in some sense is not necessarily the height of human experience or calling, but it's like sweeping the floor. It's necessary for us to be human, to for a certain period of time discipline yourself and kind of submit yourself to the task at hand for the greater good you've decided to pursue in your life. And so one of those two strategies I'd recommend. But thank you for the super chat. All right, guys, we're coming up on half an hour till the end, so probably super chats should taper off, if not stop entirely, so I can get to the end of these things. Ben White for $3 USA. I've heard people say that if you want to know what your wife is like in 20 years, just look at her mother. How much truth do you think there is in this statement? And should you meet a girl's mother as soon as possible? Well, I know a lot of girls who don't end up looking like their mothers, but there's always that possibility. I mean, I hate to say this, guys. You're not going to marry a woman who's not going to get old. Like, all women are going to get old, right? That's the reality of life. This. I mean, we have to steel ourselves for that, and there's not going to be any old woman that's going to look like she's in her 20s. I don't want you to meet your prospective mother-in-law who has Parkinson's and then immediately break your engagement. That sounds kind of a little nutty, if you ask me. But I don't know. Maybe it's an entertaining idea. I'd always meet. I always would meet your fiance or girlfriend's mother as soon as possible, and not because you're trying to size up what she's going to look like in a geriatric state, but rather just to see what her relationship with her family is. I find that, or I found that good girls tend to have comfortable relationships with their family. It can be a little contentious, but that's like that's a good a good sign. And like, how does her family receive you as well? A lot of that can tell you a lot about a person. I'll say that. Okay, Ben White for $3 USA. Also, no girl updates this week. Upper management is visiting our local office this year, and I want to make a good impression, like the loyal wagey that I am. Lol. Well, good luck with that. Thank you very much, Ben White. Glow in the Dark for $3 USA. When you say that there is another way of living that has been proven, the modern soy boy will say that everything that wasn't. Okay. When you say that there is another way of living that has been proven, the modern soy boy will say everything that wasn't told to you by an expert is false or propaganda, which is usually the opposite. I see what you're saying. I mean, like, we will literally, at some point, I imagine the brain geniuses at Reddit will literally try to convince themselves that all pictures of intact nuclear families are in fact deep fakes cooked up by Donald Trump and Russian hackers to convince people that happy nuclear families are actually a thing and possible. One of the most white-pilling things I listened to this week was an interview between Alex Kashuda and Helen Roy about their marriages and how they were raised as sort of liberated young women to sort of be fearful of the constraints marriage would put upon them, but they actually found deep fulfillment there. And that's not to say that there's not going to be any rough patches. You know, we all have jobs that we hate. We all have fights with our spouses. We all have arguments over money. This is the reality of marriage. But it's an adventure, and it's way more fulfilling than living as a bug man with the Funko Pops and the video games. And again, I wouldn't trade it for anything. As I say to every ContraPoints fan who comments on the debate I had with them back in 2017, and they'd tell me, oh man, you're so jealous of ContraPoints because they can do this. Well, they say she can do this professionally and you can't. And my response is always the same. I don't care that I have to work a kind of boring gray programming job and squirrel away 2 hours in the evening and miss a good chunk of my sleep every Tuesday night to do this passion project, because overall I really like my life and I wouldn't change lives with Natalie Wynn for all of the money and the clout in the entire world, because chasing clout's really, really stupid. Anyway, Glow in the Dark for $3. Next one. Were you disappointed by Peterson's conservative goals speech? Do you have any suggestions to help Peterson other than to get Ben Shapiro out of his ear? Yeah. It does feel like Ben Shapiro literally crawled into Jordan Peterson's ear and then came up with a legal document. Or Ben Shapiro and 5 of his best friends from law school, like Fantastic Voyage style, climbed into a submarine, journeyed into Jordan Peterson's brain, and then produced a lawyerly document called the Conservative Manifesto. I did a stream with this on Settler Lament's channel, so I don't want to really belabor the point here again because a lot of people have already heard this. Peterson's Conservative Manifesto is one of the most confused, verbose, and vacuous documents that has been produced by a reasonably intelligent person in a very long time. The document says almost nothing, and it is incredibly out of tune with the world we live in right now. What the world we live in right now is demanding of us is to make certain statements about what we fundamentally believe and what we fundamentally think is worthy to take into the future. It's not to come up with some kind of recipe or some kind of chemistry formula for how we can rebalance liberalism and sell this back to progressives as some kind of last hope for Western civilization. That ship has already sailed. There's no going back on this. And coming up with incredibly verbose language, it's like I said at the beginning, anything that's worthy of saying should be expressible in very simple language when it comes from these spheres. And the more complicated the language gets, the worse the misunderstandings become, and the more opportunity we have to deceive ourselves. And Jordan Peterson's Conservative Manifesto felt like an entire exercise in how to deceive oneself into thinking that we're somehow in an age that we obviously don't live in. It's so funny because Jordan Peterson was the master of this thing called the archetype. And the archetype is it's sort of foundationally or imagistically a very basic element of human communication. It's like, this is what it means to be me. This is what it means to value what I value in the form of a story that's been repeated many, many times. And then it seems like somehow Jordan Peterson forgot all that stuff about archetypes and the usefulness of collective unconsciousness, and has gone on to just firing verbose legal documents into the ether with the hope that the people who hate his guts will adopt them wholeheartedly. Like, if what is the conservative movement supposed to assent to that? Like, who's supposed to read that and change their minds? Nobody. It's a ridiculous document, and it applies a fundamental misunderstanding about the world he lives in. It feels like he's in a complete bubble. And maybe he's too old to get out of that, right? Like, we can't lean on the boomers anymore because they're just too old to change at this stage. There's not enough years in their lives, and the changes that they need to make are way too big. The changes that we need to make in many ways are too big for people like me to make. I still can't leave behind the elements of modernity that I've become attached to in some ways. And that's hard to deal with. And I don't know. I think Peterson, I think he just needs to take a break, or we need to take a break from him. He's not speaking the language that all of us are speaking. And it's really kind of funny because while all of these really spurgy conflicts over terminology and words, and whether Europe or America is more based or going on, the stark reality of the dissident right is pretty much everybody agrees on the fundamentals. Like, just look at the career of Alex Kashuda's Subversive podcast. He's interviewed pretty much everybody in these spheres at this point. She's interviewed like anonymous Twitter accounts and vloggers and authors and Catholics and atheists and blah, blah, blah. Go down the line on this podcast. And everyone, like, they understand what the issue is. They understand the negative vision that these issues are fundamentally baked in to at least the latest iteration of liberalism, if not the liberal project in its entirety. And they also understand that the stakes are that we have inherited a human race that has rapidly declining health, both collectively, spiritually, and individually. And that we need to find some fixtures that are going to improve human health so that we can persist and survive as a society. Otherwise, we'll be totally obliterated. They agree on the fundamental negative point and the fundamental positive point about improving health. And the baseline for health is always a previous iteration of Western life for almost all of her speakers. There's an incredible amount of consensus in the midst of us tearing each other apart over these like minuscule differences in language. But anyway, thank you very much. I'm going to go on to Scrouchy McDumpwaffle for $3. After seeing how little the dissident right is united against the general lack of action in a grand scale, I'm almost considering going back to grilling, listening to Ben Shapiro, and forgetting about the cathedral. Well, more than what's that going to do to you? I mean, you listen to Ben Shapiro, he's just going to tell you. He's going to tell you lies. I mean, I'd rather have a hard truth than an easy lie. Oh man, it's going to be another election. We'll right this ship. Blah 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 blah. Don't give up grilling. Grilling is great, but always be building and build on truth. I mean, spurgy fights over nothing That's always going to be part of the internet. And the point of people who are like us is to rise above it and to not get drawn down to the lowest common denominator as soon as this stuff happens. So anyway, thank you very much, though. Good luck grilling, I should say. I did some meeting with other parents this weekend. It was really refreshing. I got the sense that most parents were pretty normal. Parenthood does that to people. It really did even them out. Thoughtful Guy for $3 USA. Thoughts on Exodus 90 men's Catholic spiritual exercise for fraternity, asceticism, and prayer. Sounds crazy, but very transformative. 90 days of cold showers, daily holy hour, no sweets, alcohol, and tech, etc. 90 days. It sounds like P90X, doesn't it? Yeah, I mean, this sounds 90 days of intense exercise and cold showers and dieting. I did P90X when I was in my 20s. It was great. I got into like excellent shape and it was amazing. I did it for 90 days and it was great. But that's not my life anymore. I'm going to try to improve my diet, obviously. I'm trying to get better at exercising and prayer habits. But I can't just do this thing where you take everything, your entire routine, and flush it down a toilet and light it on fire. Like, I have too many family crises happening in the background. So I would recommend that for young guys. 90 days is a pretty good period for hard exercise to really challenge yourself. But for older men, I think more incremental change is in order. It doesn't make any sense. There's too many other people I'm responsible for. And it's, life's too, I don't know. Maybe I could try something a little bit like that for Lent. That might be a good window to try that. Yeah, but that's people say that young men have the capacity for heroic action when they're not married and when they're celibate, but they kind of lose that when they become married. And there's a lot of truth to that. Conversely, though, I will say that it seems that at least on the internet, women only get to be better content creators when they get married. You think of like your top female content creators like Aiden Paladin, Poe the Person, Alex Kashuda, to mention her for the umpteenth time. They're all married women, right? Helen Roy, I just learned about her the other day. Like, these are all married women. And that is because I think that women need to get married in order for it's sort of like a light that needs to be focused. I think a lot of their wisdom is kind of absorbed. But when they're married, and specifically when they have children, it necessarily has to be focused onto a practical end. And this gets them thinking in real directions, which is to say right-wing directions. And they end up having a lot of unique feminine contributions to right-wing thought for that reason. But thank you very much. I'm going to go on to the next one. Glow in the Dark for $3 USA. I just realized how juvenile it is to twist words or manipulate what people said to fit what you want it to mean. Is that what I did to annoy my little brother when I was younger? Yeah, but Glow in the Dark, we all do this, right? Like, this is the classic debate tactic. And we all kind of implicitly do this. I mean, when you're in a debate, you are oftentimes what you're trying to do is you're trying to logically manipulate your opponent's position into incoherencies. And that's certainly true for, like, paganism is a great example of this. Like, I want to take them aside and go like, okay, like 99% of your arguments are bullshit, and I think I can show them to you. But I also want to tell you at a fundamental level, like, I get it, right? Like, I get that blood is sacred. I get that landscapes are sacred. I get that we have this communal spirit, this communal spirit and spirituality that seems to inhabit particular peoples into particular times and in particular locations. And that feels like paganism, and it does not feel like monotheism, and you want to express this. like so I want to tell them, but I obviously don't think that the way to express that is the way they are doing it. But I want to tell them at some level that I feel like I understand the core of their argument, and I want them to help me understand more of that core argument, and I want them to feed me less sort of like trolley problem bullshit that don't even really exclusively apply to Christians, right? Like, would you choose to murder your son or murder the entire human race? It's like ridiculous things like that where no matter what your answer is, it makes you look like a bad person, right? But anyway, yeah. But thank you, Glow in the Dark. I'm gonna move quickly since we're getting to the end of the super chats. Sam153 for $10. Good evening, Dave. Any thoughts on Alex Jones's trial? It all seems par for the course in the common injustice of our age. Well, Alex Jones's trial was tough because they had it seemed like they had a pretty, slander is a thing. And there were, like, a lot of what Alex Jones did seem to go right up against the definition of slander if it did not cross the line. And I don't know the details about whether there was actual harm that came from that. I'm told there was. I'm not I never really watched Alex Jones. I'm not an expert on him. So like there did seem to be a case there that might have been legitimate. But what was bullshit about it was that it was very obvious that there was an ideological dimension to this prosecution, that special care had been taken to make this sort of a theatrical event, to do down Alex Jones publicly, and that the judge, in fact, was playing along with this. That she was kind of mugging for the camera while she chided him about the nature of truth. That doesn't strike me to be... that doesn't strike me to be standard or procedurally necessary. It strikes me as an ideological deviation. And so you can have show trials where people are actually guilty. So without speaking to whether Alex Jones is guilty or innocent, this does have show trial implications, right? But thank you, Sam153. I'm going to go on to the next one. TN1000. When I went to college, my professor told me that if we stopped drinking soda for one day, it would cut down on T2 diabetes. But I also had a business student friend who told me that if we did that, the economy would collapse. There is no way out without suffering. It's like two ridiculous technocratic midwick takes competing each other. It's like would a soy indestructible barrier sustain impact from a soy unstoppable object? It's like how bugman do each of these takes have to be? Like one weird technocratic trick to fix all of your problems. But the Reddit mind always does wonder. I imagine at some point people are going to get over Reddit. And I feel that really it was like no one was ever happy. No one ever had families. No one ever lived in communities. No one ever had, Europeans never had countries of their own. Like that meme, I feel like that prefigures the end of Reddit being taken seriously, because you can kind of feel the bugman rage oozing out at every pore of that interaction. And it just like the desperation and cope is just palatable at every level. And no one wants to be a part of that anymore. It's really hard to, it's hard to take seriously. Okay, Ben White for $3 USA. I've had a hard time recently with my spiritual life. I'm finding it very difficult when I pray, and I never seem to hear anything from God. How did you deal with periods of spiritual drought? Well, yeah, I'm someone who struggles with prayer a lot, and we started doing the rosary for the first half of the year every night with me and my wife, and then we had a move and we stopped doing it. We never resumed it, and now I think we need to resume it again. But Ben White, like I've never had a direct spiritual experience where I could hear God talking. I have sort of moments of intuition. I have moments of serenity. I have moments even when I feel like I might be in contact with something holy. but something that's so direct and palatable is not something that I have had much experience with, nor do I think it's necessary. I really don't. I think that the important thing is to dedicate yourself intellectually and in bodily practice to a greater good. And that dedication, even when you do not have an emotional reaction to the practices you're going through, is what's really important. And to foster that kind of constancy in your own soul. Like, this is what I do. I'm a Catholic, so I pray, I go to Mass. I don't care if I feel it or see it. This is what I've dedicated myself to, and I'm going to follow through. I'm getting a little bit tired, but I'm going to keep on going because I need to read the psalm at the end. Andrew Wilson for $3. How much should it matter that a partner is an intellectual match for you? At what point does it become unhealthy to not be on equal footing and place yourself as an educator? Well, I feel like I'm kind of cheating in this because I married a very smart woman, but also one that I'm kind of, I say like I have a worldly advantage on her in the sense that I've certainly read more. And so I'm frequently in the educator role. Husbands should be educators to their wives in a lot of ways. And I don't think it's unhealthy that she look up to you. This is a hard question to answer because I don't really know the lower bound of it. The point is women need to be intelligent enough to be interested in what drives your passions, even if they don't understand it. I don't think it's women's role to fully understand men, and I don't think they want to really understand men. And so in some sense, you're always discovering her nature as a woman, and you're always educating her about your own nature as a man and as a political creature that interacts with politics and interacts with the world in a much different way. And so I guess I didn't really answer your question, but what you're looking for is a common language, and a common language that specifically communicates value and that communicates the elements of your life that are going to maintain that constant rhythm that's been a theme of this show. That's what you're looking for. Whether she can understand like calculus is kind of stupid. I mean, that's not really important at all. So I would really just cut women slack on this stuff. They really don't need to have masculine minds at all. What they need to have respect for your masculine mind. And that's really what you're looking for. And they need to have enough self-awareness and enough intelligence to understand it to the point where they can respect it. If it's like some kind of, if it comes off to them as you being weird, that you're interested in things like politics or philosophy or that's not a really good sign. I think it's certainly overcomable, or it can be overcome. But you want to have this, I don't understand you like Hegel, but I really respect that this is an interesting thing. And I like you explaining to me, even though I don't understand. Like, and it's not just a female thing too. Like, I like this as well. Like, I like hearing people explain to me things that they're passionate about, even if I'm totally not passionate about them myself. For instance, I had a friend who was really into NASCAR, and I had a really interesting conversation with him where he just explained to me the dynamics of NASCAR. And because he was so into it, it was fun for me to kind of wrap my mind around it, even though I couldn't imagine anything more boring than NASCAR. But the passion of the friend made it interesting. And that universal human response is the response you're looking for in specifically a mate. Not to understand, but just to understand understanding. Not to be sort of self-referential. Asteroidal assassin. How do I know? I know how to draw, and I'm planning out a graphic novel. I'm not sure you remember this, but a while ago you jokingly mentioned a boarding school, but for training right-wingers. I thought about the premise, but I'm not so sure how it will work. What will be the conflict? What would the setting be like? Well, there's lots of different ways you could do this. The most fun way to do this is to sort of subvert the Harry Potter trope and make and imagine sort of a future progressivized totalitarian system, and have like the boarding school kind of be a secret boarding school, but instead of learning magic, they're like learning the classics. They're learning what it is to be sort of like soulful and see colors. And you could, I mean, that idea is thoroughly young adult fiction, but who am I kidding, right? If you're writing graphic novels, I mean, graphic novels operate, I mean, the best graphic novels based on actual novels are based on young adult fiction novels, right? That's why Neil Gaiman was a thing, right? And so like a funny way, it would be, it actually kind of would be funny if you did this. And there's 1,000 ways you could do this, right? But like a secret boarding school for traditionalists, or some kind of religion. You could even make it a made-up religion, but the religion has like obvious right-wing signals to it. Under the nose of a totalitarian, like egalitarian society that's completely gray. And what would be so funny is that you could turn it into a comedic dimension if you wanted to, by constantly alluding to Harry Potter characters, so that like the Harry Potter fans are the villains when they're actually in contact with like a Harry Potter type situation of that secret boarding school. And and one thing about teenagers is that it's, if you were doing like a boarding school of teenagers, is that it's really easy to write conflict for teenagers. It sort of writes itself, right? Like the high school drama is the easiest drama, other than like sword and sorcery fantasy. High school dramas have the most tried and true archetypes of any genre that came out of the 20th century, and you can just tap right into it, right? Like it's really easy. So I know that's one way you could do it, but that would be a more like jokey young adult fiction way of going about it. Writing like what this actually would look like in a realistic progressive society, that would be a lot darker and probably a lot less sexy and probably a lot less amenable to graphic novels, to be honest. It would also be much more challenging because you constantly have to, you can't lean on the suspension of disbelief, right? So much of the funnest in like Harry Potter is that you go balls to the wall and just go like, okay, like, your things don't really make a lot of sense in this universe with the physics, or even the politics if you really burrowed into it. But we're going to run with it anyway. But I don't know. Hopefully that helps, Asteroidal Assassin. Try your hand at based Harry Potter. I always I'm not saying go full Murdoch on that, but if you imagine the Murdoch characters in Harry Potter, you can already imagine like the target-rich comedic environment that could erupt from that, right? Maybe hold off on the racist jokes a little bit. That might be good, but I'm just saying there's some potential there, right? Remy Coppard, do you think that canards will continue to exist? So do you think that Canada will... Good Lord, I can't even pronounce my wife's home country. That's how late it is. Remy Coppard for $5 Canadian. So do you think that Canada will continue to exist as we know it? And what is your general thoughts on the future of Canada? I think Canada will continue to exist as long as the State Department exists. The State Department goes down, then there's a high probability that things like Quebecois and Western independence will... I mean, people talk about that all the time, right? They talk about all the time that the sort of the petroleum-based Western provinces are going to separate from Ontario, and of course the Quebecois separatists have been a thing since the 1950s in Canada, and so what's holding this political order together, what's sort of tamping down on the political imaginations of these groups, is the understanding, and it's really understood in Canada, that nothing will ever change. That either Trudeau will rule forever, or a conservative person that says all the right words but does exactly what Trudeau does will rule forever. And because of that, no Quebecois governor is imagining himself as king of a restored French Republic in the New World. Like, that's not part of his imagination or possibility. And because of that, we the reason why our political imagination is so constrained is because political power is so concentrated, and there is no potential rival to the United States. Once the United States' power begins to falter, all sorts of political possibilities that have previously been considered almost impossible will start becoming very possible again. Like, before just last year, how was it even possible that not only would America lose in Afghanistan, but the Taliban, the very people we kicked out in 2001, would come right back in and set up an Islamic State, and the rest of the world would immediately just go, oh, well, you conquered it, it's yours. That happened. And I think that as the American empire recedes, possibilities don't contract, they in some sense grow, or they diversify. Dangers also grow as well, and the world will be a much less safe place. But it opens up all sorts of possibilities that are really exciting and really promising. And so, I think Canada is probably not going to be absorbed into the United States, but outside of support from the United States, I think Canada would fracture. That's my instinct. Outside of support from the United States, I think the United States would fracture too. But that sounds horribly contradictory, so I won't explain that. I'll just move on to the next super chat. This person may in fact be French because he's giving me Canadian, which means I should pronounce the T silent. Fado says for $10 Canadian. Hi Dave, I'm wondering if you had any thoughts on trying to foster relationships with family. It feels so unnatural, despite that it should be. Never mind possible viewpoints or experiences divide. I feel already weak family bonds. It weakens opportunity, which magnifies the problem. Well, you didn't ask this question in the super chat, but with my own experience, I am pretty close with one or two family members that I share broad political views with. That we see the problems and we see the challenges ahead of us. I have very good relationships with a lot of my other family members who are more thoughtful. But there is a section of my family, a very large one, that is very, very progressive. And it's very, very hard for me to communicate with them. If they're apolitical, I think the path to building relationships with your family is to find the thing that they're really passionate about, that's the closest thing to what you like, and that make that a thing that you talk about together. So if it's, my mother likes French movies. I don't think I ever watched French. I've recently watched a French movie with her recently, but that could be a point of common interest, right? But you want to build on common loves of things and quality experiences. Cooking can be a good way of bringing the family together. Eating for holidays can be a good way to bring the family together. If you have children, that's another good way of bringing a family together. And commonality of struggle and commonality of experience are what builds our bonds with each other. The problem we have right now is that our great struggle seems to be political in nature, so that if there's a political divide in the family, that sort of over... Okay, I think we're reconnected. Hopefully we're going now. Okay, I think that's it. Are we back? Yeah, sorry for that, guy. Internet problems. Okay, second disruption of the night. That's probably my signal that I should be going, but I need to get through these super chats, so bear with me. Hopefully that helps you, Fido. Just build on common struggle, on common things you do together, And I think that's a good way to facilitate better relationships with family members. Creeper Weirdo for $10 USA. I was wondering why don't we have why I was wondering why don't we on the distant right talk more about art that inspires us, even if it's something stupid or silly. A while ago, I said fun was important. What I meant was we start at fun stuff and move to important things. I get we mentioned Lovecraft a lot, but can we go further? Well, I think, I'm kind of tired of talking about politics. Maybe next week I will talk about some cultural element that I like movies or books that I like. And I'll just forego politics altogether. I could talk about 90s alternative music, for instance. And that might be interesting. I mean, people might actually like that. I would have to make sure that people would be reasonably interested in the subject I picked, but I would really like that. Yeah, I do think that I talk about politics too much on this show. The problem is that talking about cultural artifacts, it requires more preparation. Politics is actually easier to prepare to talk about. And talking about some particular piece of work, I need to make notes on that and stuff like that. Pac-Man Respector for $10 USA. AA's recent tiff with the distant right has given me food for thought. Specifically, could or should there be postmodern Christianity, and what would it look like? Perhaps it's heresy, but I have come to wonder if Christendom, as it exists, is equipped to fight effectively the rise from the ashes. Well, I mean, I hate to say this, Pac-Man, there's only one Christianity, and it's pre-modern. It's not something that is modern. Christ was not a modern figure in the sense that we experience modernity. So, short of Christ coming back in a digital format, like, you're going to have to experience a large amount of Christianity in a pre-modern state in order for it to be authentic. Postmodernity is kind of bullshit. Postmodernity is just the end of modernity, which we could be experiencing right now. We could be experiencing the end of the strong modern era. And what we'll experience after this is a decline and a return to some compromise between liquid modernity and the older existence of the pre-modern order. That's the dilemma. This whole postmodern thing, like, there is this book called Postmodern Conservatives by Matty whatever his name is, the kind of midwit dude that hangs out with Ben Burgess. This whole postmodern thing, postmodernity is just an incomplete break from modernity. It's like we want to break from modernity aesthetically and maybe politically, but we don't actually want to break with modernity in how we live our lives. So I always see postmodernity as fundamentally an academic affectation or a consumer product, and neither of those is a vessel that can hold Christianity. It's got to be something that looks more like the pre-modern version of Christianity. That's the only way it can survive. And that's the only way, and discovering those pre-modern roots, I think, is the only way that humanity can survive. You're right. I don't know that the Christian church can survive the cataclysms that seem like they're on the horizon. It has survived much worse in the past. I don't see why it wouldn't be able to survive, and I have faith in Christ's words that his church would survive. It would survive the assault of hell, and because of that, I think it will. But this is the thing with the pickup artists too, complaining about Christianity because Christianity is weak, because no one supports it. I don't know what to do with this criticism. It's just like, okay, fine. Christianity, you're right. Christianity is supremely weak at this point in history. The next question you need to ask yourself is, should it be weak? Do I want to help it be less weak? And if your answer to those questions is negative, if the answer to those questions is you want to help Christianity, then help us, get out and push, make a contribution. If you want to see Christendom go down in flames, well, I guess you're going to get an opportunity to take a pot shot. God knows everyone else is. I don't think ultimately you'll be successful, and I really don't think you're going to replace it with anything you'll like more. or anything that's going to be more fulfilling, life-giving, or provide more humanness to an existence than we've seen from what Christianity has been able to produce. And recently, Radlib published his talk from the recent conference in Britain, which was an absolute phenomenal case for Christendom, put in a 1-hour form. I recommend everyone go over to Radlib's channel and watch that talk. It was excellent. To me, Christianity is a banner worth following because underneath it, in essence, it is a strong thing. In form right now, it is a weak thing, but in essence, it is a strong thing. And always prefer essence over to form because essence is eternal. It is a strong banner in essence, and it is true and good in my assertion of it, and therefore it's worthy to follow it. And I think that postmodernism as an affectation is just really unsuited for, unless you're just changing what you mean when you say postmodernism. But Christianity cannot survive irony. And that's what postmodernism was all about. Belial Bradley for $10 USA. I enjoy your introduction to Molebug video. It's concise in what it presents. Watching online discourse in the last few years since it's surprising that people who know better keep on having to relearn things they would have already known by now. I mean, yeah, the populist illusion by our friend Economic Agent is the same thing. How should I put this? He says things that we all know, that populism without elite support is useless and it doesn't go anywhere, and that we have a lot more work to do before we have any possibility of real change. And that's a reason to take these new populist victories like in Italy, like in Sweden, with a big grain of salt, because these people can't move independently from the oligarchy beneath them, and they're too beholden. That's just the nature of the beast. They might have good intentions, but they're constrained in a fundamental way. The thing is that it's impossible for humans. Hope springs eternal, as they say, and so having sort of this escape hatch of democracy, even if you know it's sort of a false option, having it in front of you is always going to distract you from what you know needs to be done. Because there's always a possibility that you could be bailed out of your predicament by using this weapon, even though it will almost certainly not work. And voting isn't always bad. I sometimes vote. But the problem is that the psychology that voting encourages in you is bad. It encourages you to view government not as an adversary, but as if it were your servant, which it is not. You are its servant, and it is a predator. It's not someone here to serve you breakfast. And voting encourages the exact wrong attitude towards your society and towards your government and how you live your life. And so I would always say, like, if you could somehow forget that you voted, I would vote all the time, right? It would be a great thing to do. It's just that as humans, we can't do that. As humans, it's very hard to maintain those two separate ideas in your mind at the same time. Both that government is sort of the ultimate master of your destiny, and that in many ways you're fundamentally separated from it and can't influence it. And that the actions we take to influence it are going to have to be slow. And if there's going to be a great reformer, that will be very, very fast. Like this is the fundamental problem here, is that the solutions to the predicament we have are either going to be too fast for democracy or they're going to be too slow for democracy. The two things that matter is us relearning the hard lessons of the old world, of unlearning the flaws of modernity and creating a more authentic human existence for ourselves. That's too slow for democracy. And the other solution is a radical, instantaneous reform that clears out all of the bureaucrats and hits the reset button, and we immediately get a healthier system just by virtue of the waste being cleared out. And that's too fast for democracy. There's no way to get everyone on board with an action like that in time enough so that the oligarchy can't co-opt it and defend themselves against it. And so both of our solutions are just not very amenable to this kind of populism. And does that mean that populism has no role to play? Absolutely not. But the two primary solution methods don't have to do with populism, and therefore it's always a distraction. But thank you for your super chat, Billy L. Bradley. And I'm going to do the last super chat of the night, which is $5 Canadian. Pixel. Let's say Pixel for $5 Canadian. Is the Jordan Peterson on the right-wing revival of modernism and logos a viable strategy? Well, that's an easy answer. No. Logos can't possibly survive with the internet. We still have flat earthers. It's also the truth-seeking aspect of modernism that deconstructed itself and its narratives. I mean, yeah, that's true. And the first thing is that any system you have that's put forward in a dialectic sense is going to be subject to deconstruction. That's what it means to live in modernity. Which means, in the words of Joseph de Maistre, in order for a civilization to survive modernity, the motivations for its fundamental religion have to be insulated from rational discourse. It just has to be a decision. Like, I love God. I've dedicated myself to the higher purpose of Catholicism. That's just my choice. And that's where the conversation ends. And you can't deconstruct or debunk it, because to deconstruct or to debunk it is to deconstruct and debunk me. There are certain things that are up for discourse and they have to be dealt with in a discourse style way. But fundamental basic beliefs can't possibly be approached this way, or what happens is what happened. The universal solvent of modernity will burn away all ideas until all we have remaining is just dopamine receptors and consumption culture. And that's the ultimate faith. Though in order for any living philosophy or religion to persist, it has to, in some sense, have a mystical origin and not one that's born out of logic or dialectics or something like that. And it could be justified in some way like that. Just because God is at the bottom of a ladder doesn't mean he can't also be at the top of it. He's not a finite being in that sense. But we have to get out of the habit of trying to explain basic beliefs to people who do not share moral preconceptions. And furthermore, the Peterson Manifesto, it makes this implicit assumption that valueless government is possible, and that values can be derived outside of some kind of mystical aesthetic vision that we share in as a people and as religious believers. And without that, Jordan Peterson is in a sense ignoring some of the wisdom that he's sort of imparted previously in his career. And for that reason, the document's just really, really bad. But I'm finally at the end of my super chats. I'm coming up overtime as usual on the 3-hour mark. But tonight, the poem is Psalm 37, picked at random, but I do love the Psalms. Psalm 37 of David. Do not fret because those who are evil, or envious of those who do wrong. For like the grass they will soon wither. Like green plants they will soon die away. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and enjoy safe pasture. Take delight in the Lord, and he will give desires unto your heart. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust in him, and he will do this. He will make your righteous reward shine like the dawn, your vindication like the noonday sun. Be still before the Lord, and wait patiently for him. Do not fret when people succeed in their ways, when they carry out their wicked schemes. Refrain from anger and turn from wrath. Do not fret, it leads only to evil. For those who are evil will be destroyed, but those who hope in the Lord will inherit the earth. A little while, and the wicked will be no more. Though you look for them, they will not be found, but the meek will inherit the land and enjoy a peace and prosperity. The wicked will plot against the righteous and gnash their teeth at them, but the Lord laughs at the wicked, for he knows their day is coming. The wicked draw the sword and bend the bow, to bring down the poor and needy, to slay those whose ways are upright. But their swords will pierce their own hearts, and their bows will be broken. Better the little that the righteous have than the wealthy that the wicked possess. For the power of the wicked will be broken, but I, the Lord, will always uphold the righteous. The blameless spend their days under the Lord's care, and their inheritance will endure forever. In times of disaster they will not wither. In days of famine they will enjoy plenty. But the wicked perish. Who the Lord's enemies are like flowers of the field, they will be consumed and go up in smoke. The wicked borrow and do not repay, but the righteous give generously. Those the Lord blesses will inherit, but those he curses will be destroyed. The Lord makes firm the steps of the ones that delight in him. Though he may stumble, he will not fall, for the Lord upholds him and his hand. I was young and now am old. I have never seen the righteous forsaken or their children begging bread. They are always generous and lend freely. Their children will be a blessing. Turn from evil and do good. You will then dwell in the land forever, for the Lord loves the just and will forsake the faithless ones. Wrongdoers will be completely destroyed. The offspring of the wicked will perish. The righteous will inherit and dwell forever. The mouths of the righteous utter wisdom, and their tongues speak the tongues that they speak in are just. The laws of their God are in their hearts. Their feet do not slip. The wicked lie in wait for the righteous, intent on putting them to death. But the Lord will not leave them in the power of the wicked, or let them be condemned in trial. Hope in the Lord, keep in his way. He will exalt in you and let you inherit. When the wicked are destroyed, you will see it. I have seen a wicked and ruthless man flourishing like a luxuriant native tree, but soon he will pass away and be no more. Though I looked for him, he was no longer found. Consider the blameless, observe the upright. A future awaits for those who seek peace, but the sinners will be destroyed, and there will be no future for them. The salvation of the righteous comes from the Lord. He is the stronghold in times of trouble. The Lord helps and delivers unto them. He delivers them from the wicked and saves them, because they have taken refuge in him. All right, that was certainly a longer psalm, people, but have a great night and a blessed rest of the week, and I'll talk to you next Tuesday.